The Billionaire's Sudden Christmas Baby. Christmas with the Denton Billionaires. Book 2 by Leslie North. Chapter 1. Mitch. Sunday. Emergency alert. The National Weather Service has issued a winter storm warning for portions of New York City, which is in effect from 1 p.m. Sunday, top 1 p.m. EST Wednesday. Expected accumulations to reach 5 to 6 feet in some areas, with higher amounts possible. Impacts. Roads and bridges will become slick, making travel hazardous. Snowfall may be heavy at times. Exercise extreme caution if travel is necessary. Mitch Denton stared at the emergency alert on his phone and fumed. Are you kidding me right now? Pardon, sir. He looked up to see Patrick, his assistant general manager, standing in front of him, and he shook his head, frowning as he scrolled through the complete weather alert. Looks like we're in for another storm. Anyone who has family or must get home should leave now. Most already have or they've called in, Patrick informed him, scrolling through something on his iPad. Unfortunately, that means only about 20% are still on the clock. Do you want me to call around to see if anyone else can make it in? If Patrick had asked Mitch's father the same question, he would have told him that everyone was to come in or they could consider themselves unemployed. But that wasn't how Mitch worked. Shaking his head. Not yet. If the weather doesn't clear as planned, then we'll need to make some phone calls. For now, we'll do what we can. But what about you? Won't your husband be worried about you? Patrick smiled. Lance is in Connecticut with the twins visiting his mother this weekend. I've already texted him, and he agrees that it would be best if I stayed here instead of taking the train as planned, so I'll be sticking around. Mitch didn't try to hide his relief. He would never expect any of his employees to stay and work given the potential intensity of the incoming storm, but the hotel was busy with guests arriving for the holidays, and he needed as many people working as possible. Thank you. Please make sure we have enough room set aside for anyone who might not be able to make it home after their shift. Already done. Patrick's iPad pinged, and he looked down at it. If there's nothing else. Before Mitch could dismiss him, a loud crash followed by a screech echoed across the lobby. What do you think you're doing? What is that? Mitch looked at Patrick, who was already trying to figure out where it came from. Another loud crash followed by something breaking. Sounds like the ballroom where they're supposed to be setting up for the gala. Let's go. Mitch and Patrick followed the noise and came across two women wearing shirts with Big Apple Events emblazoned across them. Other than the matching shirts, the two couldn't have been more different. The one holding her hand against her chest was all softness, and the way her curves filled out her clothes made his mouth dry. The other stood there stiffly with her hands on her hips. Based on what was coming out of her mouth, she was the one making all the noise. Why are you doing it like that? I told you what I wanted, she screeched again, apparently not caring how well her voice was carrying. The curvy woman spoke quietly as she reached for a binder that had colored sticky notes as tabs down the side. I was going off the master plan that was approved by the client. I don't care. I want you to do it my way. The woman grabbed the binder, yanking it from the woman's hands, and flung it across the floor. Ma'am, if you would please lower your voice, Patrick said, and she turned on him. Fury was rolling off her in waves, and she stomped her foot. Do not tell me what to do. I've had it with incompetent workers. Her phone rang, her ringtone as shrill as she was. Pulling her phone from her bra, she answered it. What? No, Clarissa, you can't leave. That is unacceptable. Of course I know there's a snowstorm coming, but I pay you to take care of my boys, and I expect you to do as you're told. Just put on an extra sweater and take them for their walk. What the heck? Is she talking about kids or dogs? Please let it be dogs, Mitch prayed. She shoved her phone back in her bra and turned back to her employee. Just as she was about to start screaming again, Mitch intervened. Ladies, While I realize this is a stressful time for everyone, can I please ask you to keep your voices down? We can hear you on the other side of the lobby." And that was the wrong thing to say. The loud woman got in his face, and her finger would have stabbed him in his chest if he hadn't taken a step back to avoid contact. "Look, I don't know who you are or why you're bothering me, but you need to back away. You're in my personal space." The woman continued to advance on him, so he stopped moving and she got within inches of him as she continued to shout. Patrick stepped up right behind him and said quietly, "I've alerted security." "They're on their way." "What did you say?" the woman demanded. Mitch ignored her, sidestepping her stabby finger so he could see what was going on, while Patrick attempted to speak with her. Big Apple Events hadn't been his choice of vendor for the gala, which meant his father had overridden his decision, and in typical Mitchell Denton Sr. fashion, hadn't bothered to tell him. He should have expected it, but given that this year's event was to include a big announcement, he was annoyed that his father had brought in someone new. He'd lay odds that it was too late to hire someone else. Looking around at the mess, Mitch could see that only half of the traditional decorations used every year had been brought up from the basement, and he could already tell that the life-size nutcrackers that would normally guard the entrance to the ballroom had sustained some damage. The other woman, who also decided to ignore the screechy one, was attempting to reshape what had looked like one of his mother's favorite angels, which would hang over the nativity scene. One of the wings was no longer attached, and she gave him an apologetic look. She spoke quietly. "I know this looks bad, but these are amazing decorations, and I'm sure most of this damage is fixable. But it won't be by you. You're fired." The screechy woman yanked the angel from her hands and tossed it to the ground. Before the woman could say more, her phone rang again, and she tapped to answer the call. "What is it now, Clarissa?" "Number." "I don't care. Just do what I pay you to do." She continued to rant at the person on the phone while Mitch thought fast. He turned back to the other woman, who looked as though she was fighting back tears as she reached for the angel again. He spotted the binder and picked it up off the floor, where it lay open. Leafing through it quickly, he was surprised at how comprehensive it was. There were neat printouts of layouts of the ballroom, along with the lobby, and the large rotunda that graced the entrance to the hotel. He practically salivated at the color-coded breakdown for the decorating, along with the timeline for everything that would need to take place before the event. Scanning the pages, he was impressed with all the work that went into it. He recognized the layout, which was what they used every year, but there were some subtle differences. "Who did this?" he asked, tilting the binder up. The screechy woman strode over and attempted to pull the binder away, but Mitch wasn't giving it up. Sidestepping her again, he held tight as she glared at him while still talking on the phone. He couldn't believe that woman created this, which meant it belonged to the other woman. That gave him an idea. Blowing out a breath, he fought his increasing frustration. Snapping the binder shut, he handed it to the other woman. "Hold on to this and don't move." Then, turning to the woman on the phone, he calmly said, "Get off the phone. Get your stuff and go." She glared at him but had the sense to tell the person she'd call them back. Squeezing her phone, she advanced on him. "What did you say?" "I said you're fired. Take your stuff and get out. Your services won't be needed." He'd had enough of her behavior, and it ended now. "What? You can't fire me. Who do you think you are?" the woman screeched again. Apparently, she only had one volume level, and Mitch wanted her out of his hotel before she gave him a migraine. "Mitch Denton, and you're in my hotel." "Well, not for much longer." The woman froze, and Mitch knew right when she realized who she was screaming at, but then it was immediately masked by a fake plastic smile. "I wouldn't be so hasty. Your father is the one who hired my firm, and there's no way you'll be able to bring anyone else in before the gala. How about if we pretend none of this ever happened?" She reached out to run her fingers down the sleeve of his suit jacket, but Mitch shrugged her off. Turning to the other woman, he pointed at the binder. Did you do all that work? At her nod, he smiled. Good. How would you like to oversee the setup for the gala? You'll be heavily compensated for your time. She clutched the binder to her chest and smiled. I'd like that, rubbing his hands together. Excellent. Then turning back to the other woman, he said, As you can see, I have replaced you. The woman looked like she would argue again, but then she got a malevolent look on her face. Fine. I'll leave, but don't expect a refund on your deposit. Turning to the other woman, she snapped her fingers. Give me your shirt. The woman's eyes rounded as she stared at her, pulling the binder tighter against her chest. Are you kidding me? Miranda, I can't take my shirt off here. I'll drop it off at the office. Miranda's eyes turned to slits as she smirked. No, if you plan on staying here, you will not be representing Big Apple events. Shirt. Now, I can't do that. Why are you being so nasty? This is over the top, even for you, the woman told her, pleading. Give me my shirt. Jules. Okay, fine. The woman set the binder down, pulled the shirt from her waistband, tugged it over her head, and tossed it to Miranda inside out before hugging the binder to her chest again. Are you happy now? You've thoroughly humiliated me. Mitch quickly pulled his suit jacket off and handed it to the woman, who gave him a small smile. Thank you. Before Miranda could say anything else, security arrived, and Mitch pointed to her. If you would be so kind as to escort this woman from the premises. Speaking directly to Miranda, he said, We'll send you a bill for the items you've damaged. You're banned from all Denton hotels, and we will never do business with your organization again. The woman screamed, stomping her feet like a child and kicking things over. Security quickly stepped in and grabbed both her arms before escorting her away. She continued to kick and scream as she struggled to pull free. Do you have any idea how many followers I have on Insta? I will ruin you. No one will want to come here ever again. Once she was gone, they all blew out breaths, and Mitch worried that she might follow through with her threats. Any idea how many followers she has on social media? Patrick was already tapping at his iPad. Personally, 96. Her company has more than 5,000. I can live with that. Patrick, let PR know what's going on, and we'll let them deal with it. Yes, sir. As Patrick walked away, Mitch turned back to the woman who was still standing in the middle of the carnage. Holding his hand out, he smiled. We haven't been formally introduced. I'm Mitch Denton, and you're Jules Cardwell. Her handshake was firm, and she gave him a wan smile. Her eyes were still wet, but any sign of embarrassment she had moments ago had been replaced with what looked more like relief. Jules, let's go find you something to wear, and then I'm hoping you can help me salvage my gala.
Chapter 2. Jules. Leaving the ballroom, Jules followed Mitch over to the gift shop, still in shock over what happened. Miranda had always been hard to work for, but her rage level had been over the top. She couldn't help smirking at how quickly Mitch Denton had checked her attitude, and she sincerely hoped that her former boss learned something from this expensive lesson. They stopped in front of the closed gift shop, and he reached for his master keycard and let himself into the shop before looking over his shoulder at her with a too attractive smile, considering she was half naked under his jacket. One of the perks of being the boss, even when we're short-staffed because of the snowstorm. Turning on the lights, he pointed to the side wall where they sold hotelwear. Pick something out. Jules didn't question him and reached for a polo in her size with the hotel logo on it. Looking around for a dressing room, she didn't see one, and decided that expediency trumped modesty. Pulling his jacket off, she slipped the shirt on before handing his jacket back. Thank you for lending this to me. She was not going to mention that his cologne reminded her of a trip she'd taken to the mountains, or that his suit jacket was nicer than some of her better formal wear. My pleasure. Frowning, he told her to turn around and snapped the tag off her shirt. You can deduct the cost off my final bill, she told him. I wouldn't dream of it. Pocketing the tag, he gestured to the exit. Let's grab a seat and discuss our options. Directing her over to the closed coffee cart, they took seats across from each other. So, Miss Cardwell, Jules. After everything that's happened, call me Jules. All right. Jules, thank you for agreeing to stay on. I have to confess that I'm in a bind now. He gestured toward the ballroom. We're a week away from one of the biggest events of the season. Well, the biggest for Denton Hotels. My father, the current CEO, wants this year's gala to be the best yet. And between this snowstorm and a skeleton crew for who knows how long, I'm hoping you can perform a miracle. Mr. Denton. Mitch. Jules could feel her face heat in a blush, but she nodded and kept speaking. Mitch. There was supposed to be a whole team working on the setup in the ballroom. I don't know how you can expect me to get everything set up on my own. She looked around, feeling increasingly overwhelmed. When Big Apple Events got the contract for the gala, Miranda was excited. The Denton Hotel's Christmas Gala had a long history as one of the premier events for most New York City socialites, and having their name attached to it would be a major accomplishment. Miranda had immediately started eyeing both Mitchell Dentons, who often appeared in the society pages with mentions of their wealth and single status. Jules had been leery of taking on an event of this size, but Miranda had insisted they could do it, knowing that it was a major stepping stone for bigger and better events. Except that the owner of Big Apple Events had a temper and had no qualms about taking her anger out on anyone who might be in her way. Jules? She startled, realizing he'd been talking to her. Feeling the heat on her cheeks flare, she stammered. Sorry, what were you saying? He reached out to tug at the binder that she was clutching against her body like a pool float. I'd like to see the changes you mapped out for the gala. Oh, of course. Here she opened up the binder and flipped to 2 different layouts. Okay, here's the seating layout you normally use. Mitch slid his chair closer to hers, and they ended up touching shoulders as he looked over her shoulder. And what's wrong with it? It's the way we've always done it. Jules was pleased he didn't sound angry. You're right, you have. But I was looking at reviews and comments from previous galas, and some of the complaints could be easily alleviated by adjusting the flow of traffic. And look, if you move these tables, you'll open up the space better. She spent the next 30 minutes going over her suggested changes, and when she was finished, Mitch sat back. That's amazing. And correct me if I'm wrong, but with the band set up over here, that will also help with the sound? Nodding hard, she reached out to squeeze his hand. Exactly. And if you keep those doors shut, you won't get hit with the added noise from the lobby. When she realized what she was doing, she pulled her hand away, but he caught it and gave her a return squeeze. I was serious when I said I wanted you to handle all of the details. But I'm only one person. Miranda at least had a staff to help with the setup and tear down. I can't possibly do this all on my own. Maybe there's still time to bring someone else in. As much as Jules wanted the gig, she knew she had to be realistic. This was too big of an event for one person. Anyone who can be taken off their current duties will be reassigned to you when you need them, tapping her binder. You have a great plan outlined, and I'm prepared to do whatever it will take to make this happen. Jules bit her lip. This was the biggest event she'd ever participated in, and now she'd be leading it. Was she even ready for something like this? And Denton Hotels will compensate you for your time. We'll pay you what we originally intended to pay Big Apple, and there will be a bonus at the end, assuming everything goes well. Which surprised her, and she had to shut her mouth. I have to tell you, my father is planning to make a big announcement at the gala, but he hadn't told anyone what it is, even me. I'm hoping he'll be announcing his retirement and naming me the new CEO. So I want the gala to be spectacular. What do you say, Miss Cardwell? Will you do it? Jules sat back. Could she do it? He said she'd have help. She looked back at her binder. When she'd first found out about the gala, she'd set up 2 files, one mimicking what had been done before and one with suggested changes to improve the overall experience for everyone. But could she actually make it happen? With a big smile, she stuck out her right hand. You've got yourself a deal, Mr. Denton. He smiled back as he shook her hand. Excellent. Now, should we go see what we have to work with? Chapter 3. Jules. Jules felt every click of her heels against the tile floor of the lobby as she walked with Mitch back to the ballroom. Since arriving at the hotel this morning, she hadn't had a moment to herself, and she desperately wanted to give herself a high five for holding it together this long because, holy crap. She was the event planner for one of the biggest parties of the season. Her, Jules Cardwell. While she'd learned the trade working for a fab wedding planner, she'd hoped to really dig into the industry and start gathering more contacts working for Big Apple events. But working for Miranda had been problematic from the start. The woman was a horrible person, and while Jules wasn't sorry to see her go, her head was still spinning over the turn of events. Walk me through your ideas for changes, Mitch said, before they reached the double doors. Jules opened her binder and pulled out her proposed map for the event. Since this event is open to all ages, my thinking is if we move the check-in and entry over here, she indicated, pointing to another set of doors that was currently blocked by boxes. Then we can set up the kid zones away from the different food stations to avoid potential accidents. And I see you've separated out the food stations. Why? She was surprised at how interested Mitch seemed in everything that was going on. Most people don't want to walk through an entire line if they simply want to grab one type of food. Separating it out makes it easier for everyone to get through the different stations, and it'll be easier for the servers to refresh the food and keep the area clean. What about the dessert station? Denton Hotels is known for our chocolate cake. My mom loved to bake, and our dessert menu takes pride of place in her memory. Mitch smiled as if he was thinking about a different time. There will be 2 dessert stations. One will be geared toward the younger attendees, and for the other, I'd intended to provide miniature renditions of 3 or 4 of the more popular dessert items in 2-bite size. She flipped over to the menu page. Your mom's chocolate cake, a seasonal fruit tart, your vegan carrot cake, and your newest addition, the lavender cake. That sounds perfect. Chef Chris will be delighted to find out we'll be serving 2 of his creations. Chef Chris? The Chef Chris? He created those desserts? The lavender is my favorite, but I could eat that carrot cake for breakfast any day of the week. Mitch laughed. Chef Chris, or Chris Denton as we call him. He's my cousin, and he revamped all our menus in the different hotels. He designs all our seasonal menus and works with the on-site chefs to make sure everything is perfect. We're lucky to have him, and everyone benefits when he's in the mood to experiment. That's amazing. I don't know why I didn't put it together that you're related, given the last name. I watched him on a recent competition and tried to make his winning recipe. Jules laughed. I made such a mess of the kitchen. It's the first time I've ever contemplated moving just so I wouldn't have to deal with the cleanup. She shivered dramatically and was pleased when Mitch chuckled. Wait, why was she pleased? This wasn't the time to think of her client as anything other than her client, even if he was gorgeous. Get it together, Jules. Flustered, she tried to redirect her thoughts back to the urgent matter at hand. The gala. As she continued to outline the plans and explain why her suggested changes worked better, she could no longer control her awareness of Mitch. Was his voice suddenly sounding huskier? Was his smile warmer? Was that a twinkle in his eyes? Not a fan of the man bun. Jules jumped, realizing that he'd been talking to her and she'd completely tuned him out. Sorry, I was thinking of something else. Man bun? Oh, you mean the Santa? She laughed, feeling flustered that she was allowing her thoughts to get away from her. Hipster Santas are all the rage right now, and the guy I have scheduled to work the gala is amazing. You won't be disappointed. He's great with kids and women. Mitch crossed his arms, and Jules felt like he was going to veto Hipster Santa. If you think it's too much, he can also rock the traditional Santa role and wear a wig. Please don't want that. Please don't want that. He uncrossed his arms and turned away from her to study the room. We've always used our traditional Christmas decorations, some of which date back to the mid-1900s. Will Hipster Santa seem too out of place? Not at all. Grabbing her phone, she pulled up Hipster Santa's Instagram to show the different outfits he'd worn and handed Mitch her phone. He's surprisingly versatile, and I can guarantee that he's well-liked. Mitch scrolled through the photos before handing her phone back. I'm going to trust you on this. I don't have time to micromanage the gala, even if I wanted to. They continued to go over her ideas, and Jules was happy to see that Mitch was on board with everything else. Every few minutes, they were interrupted by his phone, but he was quick to take care of it before returning his attention to her. My executive assistant would normally handle these calls when I'm in a meeting like this, but she was one of the ones who didn't make it into work today. I'm actually surprised you're spending this much time with me, and on a weekend. This seems beneath a future CEO. His answering smile gave her butterflies that she needed to stop. Not at all. Well, maybe he rubbed his face before shoving his hands into his pockets. I cannot stress how important this year's gala is to me, and with the weather refusing to cooperate and being short-staffed, everyone has to help out, including me. Jules squeezed his arm. Well, with you helping out, this gala will definitely be the best yet. Mitch appeared to blush at that. I wouldn't go that far. He rubbed the side of his face, and she could see him visibly trying to get it together. Did he think she was flirting with him? Was she flirting with him? Jules knew she was excited about the job, but was she coming across too strong? Right then, he went on, most of the Christmas decorations for the public areas were set up over Thanksgiving weekend, which just leaves the additional decorations we add for the gala. Should we check to see what's left to do? I know the tree for the lobby was delivered over the weekend, but it hasn't been decorated yet with the Children of the World ornaments, and the manger was set up yesterday. Oh, really? Jules perked up. At least that was one thing she could cross off her list. I didn't see it. They moved it this year. It's right inside the main doors. Mitch led the way back through the lobby, past the huge and real Christmas tree. Lights and ribbons draped the tree along with oversized silver and blue balls. Boxes were stacked next to it, and someone dressed in a hotel uniform was digging through them. Mitch stopped at the tree and gestured to the open boxes. Each year, we choose a different children's charity to showcase, and Denton Hotels matches the donations given at the gala and any others received through the end of the year. As a thank you, every donor will be able to pick an ornament off the tree. He reached into the box and pulled out an ornament and handed it to Jules. Each ornament tells a different story about a child helped. Jules took the ornament, which had pictures of a smiling, toothless little boy waving at the camera. Turning it over, she read his brief bio, which included his favorite things to do and country of origin. This is such a great idea, and everything looks so festive. This was her favorite time of year, without exception. The decorations, the crisp New York mornings, the flurries, and even the snowstorms. She loved all of it. Something about Mitch at her side made her feel a little dreamy, too. He had presence. Strong and tall and safe. Not to mention drop-dead gorgeous. His dark brown hair looked expertly styled, yet somehow like he'd spent most of the morning tugging at the front of it. A Manhattan socialite wrapped up in a bachelor billionaire package was how the tabloids described him. Exactly the sort of man her mother had always warned her about. We're trying, Mitch said, sending her what looked like a genuine smile. This was always my mom's favorite time of year, so we try to go big. Go big or go home, she joked without even meaning to. On the inside, she grimaced. What a dumb thing to say. But Mitch laughed. Exactly. Sort of our ethos around here, which would explain why we never go home. Jules smiled to herself, the crisp winter air hitting her in a whoosh when the lobby doors opened. Just inside the main entrance in the vestibule sat the nativity scene, which looked as though it was nestled in a winter wonderland with the falling snow outside the huge window behind it. Mitch strode quickly toward the creche, which featured a miniature stable and figurines that came up to her hips. This is our star decoration, Mitch said. It's always the first thing to go up. Nothing else can happen until the nativity is out. Jules peered down at the Mary and Joseph statues. She tilted her head, examining baby Jesus. You always use these statues? Something about Jesus seemed very lifelike. Yes, since probably the early 80s, before I was born. They've gotten some facelifts over the years, but it's always the same. Jules's chest tightened as she knelt. She could have sworn Jesus had moved. This baby looks very realistic. Is it supposed to move? Does it? Mitch stepped closer, and the two of them leaned forward to examine the scene. I've never really noticed. The blankets around baby Jesus shifted, and then his arm moved. Jules gasped. I think that's a real baby in there. She surged forward, feeling inside the wooden manger. Her stomach sank to her feet when her fingertips connected with a soft, warm body. Oh my God, it is a baby.
Chapter 4. Mitch. Please tell me you're kidding. Who would do something like that? Mitch asked. He watched as Jules scooped up the baby and unwrapped the wool blanket that had been disguising its presence. There's a note pinned to the baby's jacket, she said as she made soft cooing noises. What does it say? I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. Please help her find a better life and give her a better Christmas than I ever could. Emotion clamped Mitch's throat as he looked from the baby to Jules, her own eyes wide with disbelief. Mitch. Her voice came out in a whisper. He watched as she held the baby close in her arms, her body swaying as the baby nestled against her chest. Who would do something so horrible as to abandon a baby like this? There were other places that would have been safer. What if no one had seen her? Mitch had his phone out and was dialing 911. I've no idea, but I'm calling emergency services. When he got a fast busy, he disconnected the call. Well, that didn't work. I got an all systems busy message. She joined him. What are you going to do? Come on, let's go someplace warm, Mitch said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders and urging her back into the lobby. He looked around, hoping to catch Patrick, but he wasn't there, and the front desk was busy. Heat blasted over them as they re-entered the hotel. Mitch guided her toward a small alcove overlooking a central courtyard, which was dappled with evergreen bushes. Outside, the sky had turned a bleak gray as snow continued to fall. Looking at Jules, she looked as stricken as he felt. He watched her swallow hard while looking down at the sleeping baby in her arms. What should we do? She asked. Her voice cracked on the question, and he could see her swallow again, as if she was trying to push down something distasteful. Mitch wet his bottom lip, his icy blue gaze sweeping up to meet hers. He was trying to wrap his brain around why someone would leave a baby at a hotel when there were other places far better equipped to help. What did he know about a baby? We'll figure this out, he said in a low voice. Just give me a second. The hustle and bustle of the lobby ratcheted up to a commotion. And it wasn't because of the baby. Nobody else knew or noticed that they'd discovered a real live infant abandoned in the manger out front. Mitch's head spun as he guided Jules to sit down with the baby in her arms, his brain in overdrive. He searched for an available staff member to recruit. Every single person was in a different state of losing their cool on a phone call, with a guest or both at the same time. I'll be right back, Mitch said to Jules before heading toward the front desk. The air in the lobby felt pulled tight, as if it might snap at any second. He strode toward the desk but stopped as some guest nearby sighed loudly. I don't think we're going to be able to stay here, but we can't leave either, one of them was saying. Mitch paused, feeling the customer service side of him leap into high gear. Hi, I'm Mitch Denton, owner of this hotel. He offered his hand to the frazzled-looking man and his wife. Is there anything I can help you with? I don't know. The man raked a hand through the sparse field of hairs left on his head. We were about to leave for the airport, but we got word that our flight was canceled because of the snowstorm. We can't keep our room for another night because it's been booked. Mitch led them toward the front desk, intent on resolving this. He made sure that the first desk clerk who hung up was tasked with their rebooking issue, which meant that it took some time before someone was able to tend to him. Mitch made sure all his guests were helped before he took his turn. The customer always came first. That was the family motto. When he glanced back at Jules, her brows were drawn together as she looked down at the baby in her arms. They needed to figure out whose baby this was, stat. "Hey, I need to know if any of you saw any suspicious activity near the manger scene today," Mitch said, once a lull had hit the lobby. The four ladies shook their heads. "It's been too busy to see much of anything, with this storm coming in," Lisa, the team lead, commented. "Rebookings galore," another sighed. Mitch's stomach jolted as he glanced back at Jules and the baby. They needed help. Gesturing to one of the phones, Lisa lifted it up and turned it toward him. Grabbing the receiver, he tapped 9 for an outside line, and then entered 911. There was a pause filled with dead air before he got a fast busy. He hung up knowing he wasn't going to get through even on a landline, and pushed the phone back toward Lisa. "Check to see if Patrick is still here, and then please reach someone in security for me. We have an issue that needs addressing urgently." He hesitated over whether to raise the alarm that would surely accompany abandoned baby. Best to wait until all their bases were covered. "Send them my way ASAP, and I mean now." Lisa nodded and picked up the phone as another group of guests approached the front desk. Mitch hurried back to Jules and the baby who had just started fussing. "Can you hold her for a second?" Jules nibbled on her lip and held the baby out. Mitch bent awkwardly to receive the precious package, her little head feeling surprisingly limp against his arm. "Support her head. Yeah, like that. There you go. I'm going to run to the restroom and be right back. Now, can it wait? I've never done this." "Well, you could have fooled me. You look like you know what you're doing." "Well, I don't. Maybe you should take her with you." Jules squeezed his arm, chuckling quietly. "I won't be long." "Promise," she told him before taking off, and once she had disappeared around the corner of the lobby, Mitch looked around, the weight of this situation finally hitting him. Here he was, an expert bachelor, heir to the Denton Hotel empire, holding this baby whose only caretaker in life right now was him and Jules. He hurried to remind himself that it wasn't only him calling the shots. Jules was in this with him, even though they'd just met. And it wasn't as if they had parental rights. Soon enough, the baby would be turned over to the police or child services, and once the police were finished making a mess of his lobby and interrogating everyone who was here, this little girl would be out of their lives without a second glance. Except for some reason, it felt like this was their situation to handle. His and Jules. Stumbling upon an abandoned baby forged a sort of unifying bond. They might be strangers, but they were strangers with a baby who needed their help. As if on cue, the baby started fussing and wriggling inside the pink blanket she was swaddled in. She didn't look like a newborn to him, not that he had a ton of experience identifying a child's age or anything to do with babies. He rocked her, shushing her gently. Jules had said, "her," when she'd read the note, but he knew she hadn't fully unwrapped the blanket to be sure while he was at the check-in desk. Still, the pronoun felt right. He would have bet this hotel their foundling was a girl. Her little cheeks went pink as a scream ripped out of her. Mitch gasped, then started pacing the far wall of windows overlooking the street. Panic streaked through him. What was he supposed to do with a crying baby? He could negotiate a business deal and spend 12 hours in a cramped space flying halfway around the world. He could even gamble millions of dollars in a risky new venture without batting an eye. But this baby, this wriggling little bundle, was the type of challenge he had no experience with. No preparation at all. Jules raced up to him a moment later, stroking the girl's cheek. "What happened?" "Nothing. She just started crying." The baby hiccuped and then continued crying. "Doesn't rocking help?" "I thought I'd rock her, maybe lift her up and pat her back," Jules suggested. "She might have gas or something." Mitch lifted her carefully, trying to support her head. She dipped a little to the left, and he went rigid, propping her against his shoulder. "Just tap her back," Jules guided him. Mitch patted the baby's back like she said, and her cries turned into gurgling, which then turned into a very wet eruption. All over his shoulder. Jules laughed, covering her mouth with her hand. Oh, her tummy was upset. Mitch stopped breathing for a moment as he craned to look at the damage. "Did she?" He paused, horrified by the milky white splash of vomit on his shoulder. A little bit even dripped down the front of his suit jacket. "Did she puke on me?" Jules rolled her lips inward, but she shook with silent laughter. "Poor thing. We should go get her cleaned up. And me," he reminded her. Jules reached for the baby, and Mitch carefully handed her over. "Let's go to my office. Come on." He glanced around the lobby as he led her down the side hall. Their quick steps tapped on the shiny tile floor. "Don't worry," Jules said. "I don't think anyone saw her spit up all over your nice suit." He glanced back at her as he pushed through the office door. She looked like she was fighting a grin. "I don't care if anyone saw." Having a baby spit up on his $1,000 suit was not the way he'd seen this day going. He just didn't know how to say it, without it sounding exactly the way it sounded. That he was more concerned with the state of his clothes than the state of the child. He softened slightly, sighing. "Fine. I've never been puked on before." Not even in college, Jules snickered, swaying slightly as she held the baby. Her brown hair swept over her forehead as she smiled down at the bundle in her arms. "There's a first time for everything. I think you're initiated now." He paused in the middle of slipping off his jacket, sideswiped by the sight of Jules standing there, so beautiful, but also now so tender as she held the little girl. He almost forgot what he was doing until Jules looked up at him. "You better get to it before it sets," she said. "Right." Mitch cleared his throat and laid his jacket down over a clear section of the desk and hurried into the small attached bathroom to snag some paper towels. When he came back out, Jules grimaced. "I think she got your shirt, too." He looked down, and sure enough, a small damp area right beside the breast pocket stared back at him. He bit back a complaint. "I guess I should be happy she feels better," he said with a sigh. "At the expense of my clothes." "Exactly." Jules still swayed where she stood. It seemed the baby had fallen asleep again. She wasn't feeling good, and now she feels great. Mitch worked on removing the bulk of the spit-up, while Jules walked around the office, gently rubbing the baby's back. Whenever she crossed through his line of sight, it was hard not to stare. There was something so elegant, so soft about her right now. Unlike the woman he'd met earlier, the transformation nearly stole his breath, but he couldn't even say why. "Jules is the event planner, and you're trying to find out where to send this baby." He frowned as he scrubbed at the stain. Why was that so hard to remember?
Chapter 5. Jules. Jules had a sleeping baby in her arms for less than a half hour, and already she felt like she belonged to her. You can't adopt the first orphan you find, Jules. It doesn't work that way. Certainly not legally. The words were so ridiculous she hesitated to even think them. It wasn't like she planned on having children. Not yet, anyway. And certainly not as a single mom. She'd thought that someday she might settle down, find a great guy, start a family the old-fashioned way. But for some reason, this baby in a manger seemed like a test of that idea. Or was she falling victim to the Christmas season and the incredibly sexy man in the room? Jules struggled to keep her eyes off him as he unbuttoned his shirt. It was almost like he'd forgotten she and the baby were in the room, since she'd been standing by the windows while the baby slept. When the shirt crested his shoulders and she caught a glimpse of pale skin and sturdy, rippling shoulders, she gasped. Like an idiot. Mitch whipped around, confusion on his face. "Sorry. Should have warned you," his shirt hung open, revealing washboard abs and the absolute perfect dusting of chest hair. He offered a lopsided grin. "I'll go into the bathroom." No, no, she blurted, unable to stop her gaze from careening over the creamy expanse of his chest. She'd give a lot to see the rest of him, like the whole rest of his body. I noticed it's snowing harder. Her gaze jerked to the window at the gray sky threatening black. That's all. This is your office. Do what you need to do. Her heart stayed in her throat as he headed her way, brows drawn together as he assessed the outside world through the window. Oh wow, it's really coming down now, he murmured. The cedar scent of his aftershave reached her, the masculine scent nearly sending her to her knees. It had been long, far too long since she'd been with a man. And she had never had the pleasure of being with someone who looked like Mitch. She'd been so focused on her career and so jaded by the dating world in New York City that the majority of her male interactions were with clients and the occasional hanger-on at the bar. On the rare occasion, she even went out with her girlfriends. Truth was, she didn't expect much in the way of love. Her mother had drilled that into her from a young age. Watching her mother in one disastrous relationship after another left them both jaded and taught Jules that there was no such thing as a happily ever after. So, why bother looking for something that didn't exist? Weather reports weren't exaggerating. This really is going to be a bad storm, Mitch said, raking a hand through his hair. The shirt shifted and she caught a glimpse of his chest. She was blatantly staring now. I'm going to call Patrick so we can have security meet us in here and then figure out where... A knock interrupted him. They both swung around to look at the door just as it cracked open. Mitch, you wanted to see me? The same man she saw Mitch with in the ballroom poked his head in, then stopped short with a little, "Oh." Patrick, it's fine. Come in. Mitch waved him in, heading toward a wardrobe on the other side of the office. I was hoping you were still here. Did your assistant make it in today? I need to send some things for dry cleaning, and I could use some assistance with a few other things. Rose is off because of the storm. To his credit, Patrick didn't blink at the sight he'd stumbled into, and Jules had to bite back her laugh. To go from her in nothing more than her bra and slacks in the ballroom to Mitch in much the same state of undress now, along with a baby. A little snicker escaped her, and Patrick narrowed his eyes at her as he took everything in. I sent her home, he began, walking into the office. But I spoke with security before I came here, and they're checking video footage of the front of the hotel to see if they can figure out who left the baby in the manger. That's great. I know at the storm we're short-staffed, but I can't believe no one saw anything. How is that possible? Mitch was partially obscured by the open wardrobe doors as he shrugged off his shirt. A hanger clanged as he reached for a different button-down. When he shut the doors, he was fully clothed again, buttoning the last button on his shirt. Jules tried not to feel disappointed. Well, you're not going to like this, Patrick said, referring to something on the iPad he was holding. I managed to catch someone at Children and Family Services, and she said the soonest she could get someone over here to pick up the baby is Wednesday. Assuming we're not buried in snow by then. Mitch frowned as he adjusted the cuffs of his shirt. What do you mean, Wednesday? Isn't protecting children their job? Patrick smirked at that, shaking his head. Evidently, that only applies when the weather cooperates and it isn't so close to Christmas. I tried calling the non-emergency number for PD and got a recorded message. Jules turned back toward the windows. The flurries from a few moments ago got heavier and there was already accumulation on the street. Her heart raced as she looked back at Mitch. What were they going to do about the baby if no one could come for her? Mitch started rubbing his forehead and moved to his desk. The lobby was already a mess when we were out there just now. Flights getting canceled, people needing to rebook, and now this. We need to be business as usual despite the circumstances, but Mitchell Sr. will have an epic fit if we end up having the cops crawling all over the place in addition to the cranky guests. And that's assuming none of this impacts the gala. Mitch fished a remote control out of a desk drawer and pointed it at the far wall. A picture frame slowly slid down to reveal a television. She blinked. So this was what rich guys spent their money on. Let's find a weather report, shall we? Mitch flipped through a few channels, then set the control down and pressed his palms to the desktop. Jules should have watched the news program, but all she could watch was Mitch. His power pose yanked at her typical sense of calm. She hadn't met a man in recent times who really set her ablaze, but Mitch was the exception. Even the furrow of his brow was somehow sexy. Expected to reach upwards of 6 feet in some areas. Exercise extreme caution if travel is necessary, the news reporter was saying. Patrick sighed, shaking his head. The predictions are getting worse. I should check in with my husband to make sure they're okay. Do that, and if you need to leave, go. But Patrick was already shaking his head, which earned him a smile from Mitch. I appreciate that, but if you do need to go, I'll understand. In the meantime, anyone who can stay and work needs to. We need to prepare for a lot of rebookings, and we may want to call over to some of the nearby hotels to find out if they have any vacancies in case we need to refer anyone to a different location. Jules swallowed hard as the circumstances began to sink in. The snowfall had turned thick. Crap. She'd taken a rideshare to the hotel today, but doubted she'd be able to get one in a timely fashion now that the city was probably in a collective panic over this storm. Since she hadn't planned on walking outside, she hadn't thought to bring any winter shoes in case she needed to walk to the subway. And now she was panicking too, because she still had no idea what to do about the baby. Where were her parents, and why had she been abandoned today, of all days? Another wave of confusion and heartache crashed through her, and she looked back down at the little girl and her perfect button nose. Here's the plan. Mitch straightened, a hard edge sounding in his voice that made her straighten as well, like Patrick had. Jules will be spearheading the gala setup based on her redesigned plans. But since she's on her own for the duration, anyone who can be taken off their present duties will be asked to help. We still have time, and hopefully the snow will let up midweek, as predicted, and we'll be fully staffed again. Come Christmas, the gala will be a happy memory. Is your father still planning on announcing you as the new CEO? Patrick asked, and Jules perked up at that. Mitch shrugged. He did say he had a big announcement this year. But it is my father we're talking about. He likes to keep his plans secret until the last possible moment. Well, you have my vote, Patrick said with a smile. Now, about this baby. Right, the baby. At that, Mitch looked to Jules. I still don't understand why someone would abandon their baby like this. I mean, look at her, Jules said. She stroked the little girl's head. If she were mine, I'd never let her out of my sight until she was 18. Patrick snorted in response. Well, since I'm the only one here with kids, I can say that being a parent isn't all snuggles and cuteness. Sometimes life gets so overwhelming that giving your baby up is the best solution for both the parent and the child. But leaving her in a manger? Jules shook her head. There has to be a better alternative. Mitch turned off the TV and tossed the remote back in his drawer. That's a question we may not get an answer to. In the meantime, what do we do with her until someone can come over here to get her? Jules spoke up. I was thinking I could take her home with me, but... Mitch shook his head. Not with all this snow on the way. How could you even make it back to your place? Besides, I'm sure you don't have anything for her right now, and who knows how much longer the stores will be open. Jules deflated a little. He was right. She had nothing for a baby. No accommodations, no nothing. Not even formula. Honestly, I think our best bet is to stay right here and ride out the storm. And that includes you. Jules Mitch propped his hands on his hips. The way his blue gaze swept over her sent a chill of excitement through her. Snowbound with this sexy man? She couldn't say no to that, but she needed to do exactly that. I was planning on commuting back and forth while I was working on getting the ballroom set up for the gala. Mitch shook his head. In this weather? It'd be safer if you stayed here at the hotel. Plus, you'll have everything you might need here. Okay, she said, trying to imagine how that might look. The hotel is equipped with cribs, blankets, formula, and more, Patrick said. Great. It's settled then. Can you call for some of everything? Have it sent to the penthouse. Patrick nodded and started to leave, but Mitch snapped his fingers. Almost forgot. Could you send someone up from housekeeping to pick up these clothes for dry cleaning? I'll take them with me. Patrick said as he reached for the clothes. He wrinkled his nose. I definitely don't miss the baby puke stage with the boys. Once it was just her and Mitch and the baby in the office, Jules sent Mitch a stricken look. What now? Let's go up to my penthouse. We can get settled in there with the baby. Mitch led the way down the hall to an unmarked elevator door. He punched in a code and then shoved his hands in his pockets. I insist that you stay here as well. At the hotel? Unless you're against it, I have a guest suite in the penthouse that you can use. You'll be more comfortable than in one of our rooms, assuming we have any availability. She blinked a few times, letting the news settle into her. The elevator doors swept open, and he ushered her inside while the proposition cycled through her. Sleepover with the haughty billionaire during a freak snowstorm and an unexpected baby? Yeah, why not? Chapter 6. Jules. The elevator doors swept open 20 floors above the lobby, and Mitch gestured for her to step through. But she couldn't move. Not right away, at least. The sight of the penthouse in front of her stole her breath, and all she could do was stare. A white, glittering foyer greeted them, a wide hallway leading toward enormous floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Manhattan. She'd lived in this city her entire life, but she never tired of seeing it from high up. The view was gorgeous. The suite was gorgeous. This man was gorgeous. Come in, please, Mitch urged, snapping her out of her trance. She drifted forward, gaze bouncing off all the interesting facets of his penthouse. The sleek steel accents against the black countertops she glimpsed walking past the kitchen. The blue and gray rug in the living room, which matched the blue and gray blanket lying messy on the couch, as if he'd spent the night there watching Netflix. After being warned away from rich men and the trappings of wealth for most of her life, her mother would have been dismayed to learn that she was here, of all places. Smack dab in the middle of a billionaire's penthouse, actively being swept away by his trappings of wealth. Your place is incredible, Jules breathed, hating that she sounded as awestruck as she felt. Mitch didn't even act self-conscious. Why should he? Thanks, I love it here. He led her toward the windows where a small cluster of slate-gray armchairs nestled around a low wood table. Please sit. Make yourself at home. This is your home, too, as long as you need it to be. Jules was about to thank him when a buzzing noise sounded through the penthouse. Mitch hurried around a corner, and a moment later she heard the dull undertones of another voice and then footsteps. A hotel employee appeared a moment later, rolling a crib behind him. Mitch carried a wooden changing table, which he set down in front of the windows. Where did he... Then the baby started fussing, as if she could sense that her necessities were here. There's a service elevator off the kitchen, he explained, arranging the changing table while the employee made another trip to get more baby things. Wow. So your workers can just stop in and make a surprise visit? Oh no, he said. There are very strict rules for the use of the service elevator. It will never open unless I allow it. Interesting, she said, unable to fight the grin as she looked around. This was like being on a different planet altogether. This was a modern-day Victorian mansion, Manhattan style. I clearly don't live in a penthouse attached to a hotel, so please forgive my ignorance. He grinned, a dimple flashing. Most people don't. And I get it. It's a little weird, but it makes the most sense since the corporate offices for Denton Hotels is here as well. I'm always on site to handle problems, and who better to live in the hotel than the hotelier's son himself? The baby's wriggling and fussing escalated into a full-blown cry. The employee re-entered a moment later, dropping off a big case of baby items, wipes, diapers, even some Denton-branded onesies. Who knew if they were her size, but it was better than nothing at this point. Mitch slipped the employee a bill that looked a lot like 100, and the service elevator buzzed a few moments later. Wow. Jules wasn't even sure what she was commenting on at this point. Everything was impressive, from the decor to the quickness with which his demands were fulfilled to the fact that he had this freaking view. She set the baby down on the new changing table, her gaze snagged by the sprawling city before her. The Hudson River wound through the city, while the snowfall blanketed the concrete and the parked cars lining the streets below. Mitch came over to the table, swiping his thumb over the baby's forehead. Does she need a diaper change or a bath or something? That's what we're going to find out. Jules grinned down at the infant. I have to admit that I know nothing about children and wouldn't have the first idea how to change a diaper. I don't mean to make an assumption that you do simply because you're a woman. Jules laughed. Well, you're in luck. I worked as a nanny to help pay for college, so I do happen to know a thing or two about kids. But I have to admit, she's a lot younger than the kids I'm used to. Jules undid the swaddle and found the baby in a tattered onesie and a diaper, which looked way too small for her. Her heart sank. Maybe her family was poverty-stricken. Maybe dropping her off at the front doors of a hotel really was the best decision. She might never know. Oh, honey, Jules murmured, carefully opening the bloated diaper. Can you pass me some wipes, please? Oh, yeah, sure. Sure, just, Mitch poked around in different bags until he finally lifted a package. Are these wipes? Sure are. She smiled as he tugged out a few wipes and then placed them carefully along the side of the changing table. Like this was his way of really helping. Now I need you to see if you can find a size 2 or 3 diaper in there. Size 2 or 3? He repeated, sounding uncertain as he assessed the boxes of baby things. How will I know? It should say on the package, or the diaper itself. Jules carefully wrapped up the full diaper, cooing down at the girl as Mitch continued his search. Aha! A moment later, he delivered a small white diaper and looked proud. Here it is. Size 2. Got it. That's great. How about something clean for her to wear? I thought I saw some onesies in the supplies. Onesies? Mitch was sifting through the bags. Like this? He held up a onesie that said, I love Denton Hotels. And Jules nodded. Warmth spread through her as he set it down on the changing table. She hadn't ever really imagined what starting a family might be like, much less imagined the guy she might start one with. But this right here, playing new parents with a successful hottie like Mitch, was more fun than she'd anticipated. Do you want to change her diaper? She teased as she slid the new one under the little girl's butt. I should watch you at least once before I attempt it, Mitch said, his brows drawn together as he watched her movements. Have you ever changed a diaper before? Jules fastened the diaper and then carefully removed the tattered onesie. Will you be absolutely shocked if I say no? A laugh rocketed out of her. I'd be absolutely not shocked. There probably isn't much time for diaper changing while running an international hotel chain, is there? That and a startling lack of babies in my family. Mitch gave her a warm smile, one that sent heat flashing through her. The man was too good-looking, too easy to be around and talk to, even with an orphaned baby and lots of unmade decisions between them. I'm not married, and my brother hasn't had kids yet. I can't even remember the last time I was around a kid that wasn't the child of a hotel guest. And your parents don't want grandbabies? He shrugged. My mom would have loved them, I'm sure. She passed away years ago, and my father, well, he's always in business mode. Jules grimaced. This was supposed to be the fun, get-to-know-you portion of the evening, but she'd already stuck her foot in her mouth. Sorry, I mean about your mom. I didn't mean... It's fine. You wouldn't have known, unless you freakishly follow my family in the papers or something. Jules laughed again, running her fingers up and down the baby's legs. No stalker here, just your run-of-the-mill event planner. Besides, she would have been lost if she'd known about Mitch Denton years ago. He was the type of man you fell for and never came back from. A game-changing crush. The type of boy she could have fallen for in high school and never forgotten about. Run-of-the-mill. He wore a strange smile as he brushed past her. Right. Let me show you where you can stay tonight, and then I say we settle in for the storm. Settle in? She finished getting the baby dressed, wrapped the blanket around the baby again, and scooped her up into her arms. Does that mean room service and a hot tub? Mitch looked over his shoulder at her, a smile so slick that her core tightened. If you want it to, absolutely.
Chapter 7. Mitch. Mitch sat in the living room, the baby in his arms, while Jules freshened up in the guest suite. The whole situation still seemed surreal to him. Bombshell house guest, tiny defenseless baby without any parents, and now the storm. The world beyond those thick glass planes overlooking the city had turned into a white sheet in just the short amount of time Jules had been in her room. When she came back out to the living room, she gasped. "Oh, wow!" Her gaze was fastened on the falling snow, but Mitch's gaze slid to that delectable curve beneath her slim-fit pants. He wet his bottom lip, unable to stop his thoughts from turning south. So the forecasts were right, she concluded, heading over to the couch. As she sank back into the cushions, he remembered they were probably in for the rest of the evening and night, which meant she had no clothes to speak of. "Since you're trapped here, I can lend you clothes," he offered, yanking his gaze off her body. The longer he watched her, the more he wondered what he might find underneath those sharp clothes. "Something to sleep in. Whatever you need. Or I can have something sent up from the gift shop if you'd prefer something new." "Can I get a Denton Hotel onesie too?" she joked, nodding toward the baby. They'd added a small pair of sweatpants to match the onesie and some oversized socks they'd found in the box of baby things. "After my unexpected stay here, I can rep the brand with confidence now for both infants and adults." She pointed to the black polo she was wearing. Mitch laughed, enjoying the scent of her amber-laced perfume that drifted his way as she relaxed nearby. He watched the baby for a few more moments. She drifted off to sleep again after he'd given her a bottle, which felt like a small victory. He could handle the baby thing, sort of. As long as Jules was here, at least. "What do you think her name is?" he asked. Jules snorted. "I wish her mom or dad had left that little detail on the note. Maybe we should name her." Mitch nodded. "That's a good idea. We can't just keep calling her girl or baby." "Right." Jules fell silent and nibbled on the inside of her cheek. The note said that she wanted her to have a better Christmas. "So maybe we should call her Noelle. Mitch watched as the girl's chest rose and fell softly. "I think it's beautiful. And very appropriate. Good." Jules smiled wide, leaning closer to look down at the baby. The warmth in her face was hard to look away from. "It's nice to meet you, Noelle." "A true pleasure," Mitch added, directed toward the baby. He gently laid Noelle down on the couch, where she continued snoozing. "She's really passed out," Jules said. "She even slept through her naming ceremony." "That's okay. We can celebrate on her behalf, right?" Mitch pushed to standing, heading toward the small bar in the adjoining room. "Do you prefer wine, whiskey, or rum?" Whiskey?" Jules said. "You don't sound very sure," Mitch called out as he pulled out a bottle of scotch. "I like all of them. And well, isn't it a little early to get drunk?" "We're not getting drunk. Simply having a toast." He poured them each a finger of whiskey and brought the tumblers back over to the couch where she sat. Jules had lined the couch with pillows so the baby wouldn't tumble over the edge, not that she moved all that much. "Now's as good a time as any, since Noelle is asleep." "Yeah, you're right." Jules received the tumbler gratefully. Mitch raised his glass. "Here's to the strangest day of my entire life," he said, and Jules dissolved into laughter. She looked up at him in a way that made him feel like he'd known her for years instead of hours, like this woman held her own secrets as well as his. To rescuing children, to planning parties, and to weathering the storm. Here, Jules agreed, and they clinked tumblers gently. Mitch tossed his back in one gulp, while Jules took delicate sips. "This stuff is good," she said. "That's why it only comes out on the most special days." "Yeah, I guess this day is pretty special, huh?" Jules fingered the leather seam of his couch, her gaze turning shy as she looked up at him. His chest went tight, and he couldn't say why. All he knew was that it felt a little too right to have the two of them here. He and Jules whiled away the evening between diaper changes, feedings, and preparing the most lavish feast they could with the scant ingredients in his fridge and pantry. Though Jules was horrified by how empty his kitchen was, he reminded her that he was a bachelor living inside a super-stocked hotel, which meant a certain codependence on the amenities of the main floor. Despite a fantastic and surprisingly fun evening together playing house, they both went to bed early. Jules offered to keep Noelle's crib in her room that night, and Mitch had to bite his tongue against the suggestion that they share a bedroom. He'd known this woman for less than a day. They'd broken a lot of unspoken rules by sharing his penthouse on the first night of caring for this baby, and he didn't want to push the envelope too far. But something about Jules felt familiar. The thought haunted him even through his sleep, showing up in the form of strange dreams and a sort of distant alertness, waiting for Jules to appear in his room or for the cry of the baby. In the course of a day, he'd turned into a watchful surrogate father. That one night of sleeplessness was as close as he'd ever gotten to the newborn phase. Yet, the next morning, he awoke later than normal and immediately wondered how Jules and Noelle had fared overnight. He also needed to check the weather. He pulled on pajama pants and a cotton t-shirt before wandering out into the penthouse. It was nearly 7, and the sunrise was just cresting. The entire penthouse was full of milky blue light, caught between night and dawn. Mitch yawned, scratching at his chest as he headed for the kitchen, but stopped suddenly when he saw the swaying figure of Jules in the kitchen. "Good morning," he said quietly. She turned to face him, Noelle's tiny body cradled in her arms. "Is everything okay?" "She woke up for a feeding, and I'm just rocking her back to sleep," she whispered, but she looked tired. Really tired. "Let me take her." He held out his hand so it wouldn't be a question, and Jules gladly passed her over, yawning as she did so. "You go back to bed." "I've got her. You sure?" Mitch nodded. Even though he wasn't entirely sure, he'd figure it out. Jules wandered off and he kept rocking Noelle, who had her lips pinched into the cutest little pout. Her one fist was clenched up by her face, and every so often she'd wriggle or twitch. Mitch wandered toward the big windows in the hallway. The entire city was blanketed in white, and he stood for a long time looking out over the quiet, snow-covered city. Moments like these, bathed in the hues of dawn in mid-December, observing the city in one of its rare quiet hours, was part of what he loved most about living in this penthouse. "If only you were awake to see this," he whispered, looking down at Noelle. He smiled at her, but it faded quickly. Noelle might never see a dawn from a vantage point like this. Who knew where she'd end up once Children and Family Services came to get her? The thought stuck with him as he wandered into the living room and settled down with her in his arms. He kicked up his feet and settled into the cushions. With his baby-bearing arm propped on the armrest, he found a comfortable position easily. He must have drifted off. A sing-song voice called out to him. "Mitch." He jolted awake. Noelle still slept in his arms, but Jules leaned over the back of the couch, smiling at him. She looked significantly more rested now, with bed-tousled hair and an easy grin. "Hey, hi." "Wow." He yawned, sitting up slightly. "What time is it?" "Just after 9. You were sleeping like a baby. Like Noelle." He rubbed an eye, trying to orient himself. The weight of Noelle in his arms must have allowed him to drift off to sleep. Normally, he didn't sleep this late, much less go back to sleep after he was up for the day. "How do you feel?" he asked, shifting Noelle to the flat couch and lining the side with pillows like he'd seen Jules do. "Rested?" "Much better now." She squeezed his shoulder. "Thanks for letting me tap out." I needed the morning nap. No problem. He pushed to standing and stretched out. How's the big bad snowstorm look? From what I can tell from your eagle's nest up here, she teased. New York is blanketed in a winter wonderland. Mitch wandered back to the windows to look down and spotted cars completely covered in snow lining the streets. Looks like the snowplows have been busy. I wonder if we can reach anyone with child services. Jules nodded, running her fingers through her loose hair. Dressed like this, in his old Boston U t-shirt and his soft shorts, she made it hard to want to leave this sweet little cocoon. Even though they needed to get Noel into the appropriate hands, especially if they weren't willing to come to them, although a part of him just wanted to keep up this happy family charade for as long as possible. It was a nice counterbalance to the cold and lonely reality that normally filled this penthouse. A single workaholic bachelor, returning to an empty home every night. Let me get changed, Jules said, and hurried back down the hallway toward the guest suite. While she changed and the baby slept, he placed a call to child services and was surprised to reach a human. The woman sounded harried and said if they could bring the child to them, they could take custody of her and begin looking into her family. Satisfied with that answer, Mitch got some coffee started and chowed down on a banana, saving half of it for Jules, since it was the only piece of fruit left in the penthouse. When she came back out into the kitchen, dressed in her black slacks and polo shirt from yesterday, it was hard to look away from her. I'm making us coffee, he said, and pulled out 2 mugs. And I saved half of the last banana, in case you're starving. She snickered and picked up the proffered banana. She took a big bite, chewed, and then said, Can't you just call room service and have them deliver it in that fancy elevator? Of course. He served up 2 mugs of steaming black coffee and then pulled out his almost empty carton of creamer from the fridge. But this banana is more immediate. Noel started fussing then. They shared a stricken look, and Jules blurted, You go finish getting ready so we can leave. I'll take care of her. Mitch retreated with his coffee to his bedroom and got dressed for the day as quickly as he could. With the city shut down, he chose a more casual look: gray slacks, a long-sleeve button-down, and a sweater vest. Once he was ready and had rejoined Jules and Noel, who was contentedly drinking from a bottle, in the living room, they started talking logistics. With most of the streets plowed, I can get us to Children and Family Services, Mitch said, heading for the main elevator at the back of the penthouse. And I've already called for a car seat. You are so on top of things, Jules murmured, slinging her purse over her shoulder as she followed him. The comment warmed him, though he didn't know why. Really, the 2 of them tackling this unexpected challenge together had gone off without a hitch. And Mitch was the type of guy to recognize things like that. The fluidity with which 2 people could work together, the inherent teamwork, the unity. And he and Jules had it in spades. Discovering an abandoned baby together was no small occurrence, and they'd handled it with ease. He grinned over at her as the elevator plunged downward. He'd only known her for a day, but this woman was one of the best partners he'd ever had. He wondered whether they would have clicked so well if they'd met under more normal circumstances.
Chapter 8. Jules. This is for the best. This is for the best. Jules had been repeating this line to herself ever since they'd rolled up to the office building, housing the Children and Family Services office. The streets were strangely quiet, making it seem more like a very early Sunday than Monday, mid-morning in Manhattan. The sleek car idled at the curb as the driver waited while she and Mitch stepped carefully through the sloppy street. Mitch extricated Noelle from the car seat while she kept her long back coat tight around her. She teetered in her heels, and she vowed to herself that she would never leave her apartment without making sure she wore weather-appropriate shoes again. Dropping Noelle off with Children and Family Services was the best idea, she kept reminding herself. So why did Jules want to keep her around for a little longer? Ready, Mitch said, holding Noelle's extra bundled body with ease in his arms. The sedan pulled away. Since the one thing they couldn't procure from Denton Hotels was an infant-size winter jacket, they'd wrapped her in a blanket instead. Noelle fussed a bit against the bitterly cold air. Holiday garland lining the front door of the building moved in the whipping winds. Jules pushed into the building quickly, holding the door open for Mitch and Noelle. "Here we are," she murmured, her chest heaving as she acclimated to the warmer space and found the right office in the building. Compared to the quiet of the streets, the lobby was pure commotion. Babies cried and fussed from all corners of the waiting room. Dour faces looked at them from every angle. "Should we just—" Jules began, unsure where to start, or even who to ask. "The service windows are over there. Well, make that service window as it only looks like one is open," Mitch said, pointing, but he didn't move. Next to them, a lady sighed. Jules edged forward through the waiting people and spotted a little wheel of rip-off numbers. She grabbed one, number 3207. Her heart sank when the number above one of the reception windows clicked to 2918. "Apparently we have 300 people in front of us," Jules murmured when she rejoined Mitch near the door. There were no seats left. "They must have several more waiting rooms we're unaware of because there's not that many people waiting," Mitch joked, which made her snort with laughter. "Maybe the other ones are better." "If only they had VIP waiting rooms," Mitch added. "I'd like to order a Perrier right now, but I'm not seeing the waiter." Jules clamped a hand over her mouth, laughter threatening to erupt. Her body shook as she struggled to contain it, and a few glares knifed their way. A receptionist called out the number above the window when the person didn't appear. She repeated it angrily one last time, and then the number above her flashed to the next in line, and then the next after that. "Looks like a lot of people left without getting any help," Jules whispered to him, leaning in close. The office was cramped, so of course this gave her the liberty to brush arms with him. She caught the scent of his cologne, and she took a deep breath, enjoying the cedar scent. Between his tall and athletic frame, the easygoing smile he liked to send her way, and this baby in his arms, it was a constant fight to keep her head above water. Little Noelle must have been more of a head trip than she realized, because with all these people jammed in around them, all she wanted to do was take Noelle and go back to the safety of Mitch's penthouse. There was a loud commotion up front as someone shouted, "What do you mean you're closing?" "I've been waiting for hours." At the shout, everyone turned to see what was going on, and Jules strained to hear the reply, but the other woman spoke too quietly. "I realize that it's snowing." "I'm not an idiot," came the same voice again. As one, people started getting up and heading for the door without waiting for instructions. Most didn't look happy, and Jules couldn't blame them. They'd come here hoping to get some help, and now they were being turned away. So why wasn't she upset? "Should we?" Mitch asked her. When he looked at her, there was no trace of joking. She swallowed, looking down at little Noelle. The girl blinked lazily, looking around the room, occasionally yawning or stretching. Christmas was less than a week away, and even if they were able to, the more time she spent in this drab building, the more the idea of leaving an innocent baby with a bunch of overworked, irritated strangers didn't sit well with her. Who would feed her? Who would change her diaper on time? Would she get the attention she needed? Babies her age benefited from touch and human interactions. The office was rapidly emptying out, and Jules jerked her head into a nod, covering Mitch's hand with her own. "We can't leave her here if there's no one available to give her the care she needs, especially at Christmas. It would be too cruel. That's what I was thinking." Mitch glanced around the room, then jerked his head toward the door. "Let's go." Jules buttoned up her coat and followed him out of the office as he placed a quick call to the driver. Frigid wind blasted them again once they hit the pavement. A few moments later, the sedan pulled up and Mitch opened the back door. The sleek leather insides were warm and toasty when they eased Noelle into the car seat. She fussed a little as they strapped her in, but once the car was in motion, she quieted. "Wow." Mitch raked a hand through his hair as he slowed for the first stoplight. "I'm not sure what I was expecting, but that wasn't it. And I'll admit that I'm not altogether sure what we're doing isn't kidnapping." Jules froze at that. Is it kidnapping if they're closing and not offering assistance? Mitch had his phone out and was making a call instead of answering her. Holding up his finger for her to wait, he blew out a breath. Donovan, Mitch here. I need to run something by you. Jules keyed in quickly that he was speaking with his lawyer as she listened to Mitch's side of the conversation, laying out how they found Noelle and attempted to bring her to Children and Family Services. Yes, I realize this is highly unorthodox, but what do you want me to do? We weren't going to abandon her again. Hold on, I'll ask. He paused and looked to Jules. How old do you think she is? Jules looked down at Noelle. Well, she can hold her head well, so I'd say maybe 3 months. Mitch nodded. Did you hear that? Yeah, 3 months, give or take. Yes, of course. I definitely want to avoid being arrested for kidnapping. Yes, got it. Thanks and keep in touch. Disconnecting the call, he huffed out a breath. Well, the good news is that his sister works in family law, and he's going to call her to see what we need to do to have temporary custody of Noelle until Children and Family Services can take her. Okay, that's good. Avoiding kidnapping charges would be ideal, but I still think we made the right decision. After all, the note said we should give her a good Christmas. We can at least do that, Mitch agreed, glancing over at her. There was something definite in his blue eyes, like they'd just shaken hands. They'd take care of her for a little longer, just until the weather cleared enough and the authorities could come get her. Silence fell over the car as Jules worked through what the next step might look like. She'd just spent the night at Mitch's penthouse, but that wasn't a feasible option for the long term. Even though she wished she could go back there and curl up in that luxurious king bed until the end of time. If that was the guest room, what was his bedroom like? One night in his penthouse, and she was willing to abandon her own life and fall into his lap of luxury. It wasn't just the amenities. Mitch was the type of man she wanted to know more about. Their night together was a blur of conversation and caring for the baby, but it didn't seem right for it to end now. But it had to. Because soon enough, she'd return to her own life, in her own apartment, alone. But she'd remember their time together for years to come. At least until her mother found out. Then the lectures would begin. Rich playboys were never the right choice because it would always end in heartbreak. Her mother would remind her. And meeting Mitch seemed like the capstone of this lesson she'd been learning her entire life. Just because they'd stumbled upon Noelle together didn't mean they had to take care of her together. It was time for her to go home. You know, I think I can handle things from here, she said. I can take her back to my place and keep an eye on her. I know you've probably got a lot going on as the COO and being short-staffed at the hotel. Are you sure? Yeah. Between the two of us, I've got more experience with kids, so it'll be easier for me. I'll keep prepping for the gala, too. Does the hotel have a list of local sitters or nannies? We do. I'll have it for you tomorrow, and I can send you whatever you need. She waved him off, feeling slightly disappointed in her own suggestion, but knowing it was the right path. She needed to get back into her own orbit. No basking in his expensive cologne or ogling his impossible view. We packed most of her stuff into the car, so I'll take what's there and figure out the rest. You're positive? Yeah, I don't live too far from here. You can just drop me off. I'll work from home and send you drafts of any design changes in the proposed program, and then plan on returning to the hotel Thursday to supervise the actual setup in the ballroom. Mitch nodded, but doubt clouded his face. Okay, just let us know where to go. Jules guided the driver through the streets of Manhattan toward her apartment. As they drove, she prepped herself for becoming a temporary single mom of an infant. Definitely not what she envisioned she'd be doing. And she really had no idea how long baby Noelle would be with her. Presumably a couple of days at least. Long enough for her to become increasingly attached to her. That much she knew. Then she could go back to her regularly scheduled program. Single working woman with a small group of friends and the occasional night out for martinis and one much-needed vacation per year. Great. It's right here. Jules pointed once he pulled onto her street and helped him find a place to double park outside her walk-up. When the car stopped moving for more than a few seconds, Noelle started fussing. We'd better hurry, Jules said, hurrying out of the car. She sure likes riding in the car. Mitch frowned, shoving his hands in his pockets as he came around to the side of the car as she unstrapped Noelle. We can keep driving around if it'll help. No, I've got it. She'll calm down once we're inside. You two go on upstairs, Mitch said, shooing her toward the front door. I'll bring up the stuff. Okay, I'm on the second floor, first door on the left, Jules said, and then hurried inside. Once she was in the calm hallway of her building, the familiar sense of caramelized onion and cleaning agent drifting through the hall, she counseled herself to be relieved. This was home. Here she was. And wasn't she happy? She looked down at Noelle, who looked up at her with clear and vibrant eyes, big baby blues that zapped her to attention. Like finally, Noelle was really seeing her. Having the baby in her arms forced Jules to acknowledge that coming back to this place wasn't returning to a safe haven. It wasn't the home sweet home she wanted it to be. But it was all she had. And it would have to do.
Chapter 9. Mitch. Mitch dragged his feet as he unloaded the car. His stomach had formed a tight knot, and he couldn't say exactly why, only that leaving Jules here with the baby seemed like a very bad idea. It wasn't that he didn't trust her, or that he didn't believe this was a safe place. No, she lived in a fine neighborhood. Jules was definitely the more capable one of the two of them. When it came to taking care of a baby, there was no denying that. Still, it seemed wrong for her to do all the work while he got to go back to his life. Part of him wanted to be able to spend time with Noelle until she was officially out of their care. They'd discovered her together. They should care for her together. It was some obscure ethical violation to shove all the responsibility onto Jules' shoulders. He closed the trunk without removing the diaper bag and pack and play and hurried up to Jules' apartment. She'd left the door cracked, and he pushed inside cautiously. The place was homey but sparsely decorated. Spartan furniture dotted a small living room, and cardboard boxes lined the wall as if she'd just moved in and was still unpacking. Hey! He went over to the couch where Jules was unwrapping Noelle from the blankets. Jules glanced up at him. Where's all the stuff? Mitch cleared his throat, easing onto the couch next to her. Listen, I have an idea. What's that? He worked his jaw back and forth, wondering where on a scale from 1 to insane this suggestion might fall. But strange times called for stranger measures. And maybe this was just the unexpected way he could give Noelle the Christmas her desperate parent wanted for her. Not that she'd remember it at her age. But he would, and a part of him wanted it far more than he was ready to admit. While Mitch lived a life of privilege, there were some things he was missing in his life. After his mother died, they'd tried to maintain the Christmas spirit that had been so important to her. But as they got older, the little details that were once so central this time of year seemed to fall away. His brother Josh had found the love of his life in Amelia last Christmas when he managed to acquire the Cedar Grove Hotel and Spa, and he was busy making new memories. Mitch would never confess it to him, but he felt envious of his brother's happiness. Maybe what he needed was a little extra Christmas spirit. He knew just how to get it. I think you and Noelle should come back to the penthouse. He ran his thumb over his knuckles as he met Jules's gaze. Surprisingly, she wasn't looking as shocked or horrified as he expected. It's a little unconventional, I know, but that way we can both care for Noelle. And simultaneously work on the gala plans. Besides, I can give Noelle a good Christmas. Both of you. Really. He paused, scraping his teeth over his bottom lip as he awaited any sort of firm reaction from her. What do you think? Jules cleared her throat, smoothing the swaddling blanket over Noelle's chest. Well, I don't know. We have everything at the hotel, everything you could possibly need. And I have to admit, I wouldn't mind spending more time with Noelle, since we won't know how long she'll be with us. He ran his fingers over Noelle's little arm as she punched a tiny fist up out of her swaddle. Clearly, his swaddling skills weren't the best if the baby could get out of it. It's your call, but just think how easy your commute to work will be if you don't have to leave the hotel. A strange smile drifted over her face. So you want me to be your roommate until the gala? He laughed. Sure, or after, if you wanted to stay through Christmas. He looked around at her apartment, which looked sterile without any decorations up. The hotel is far more festively decorated, and our chef puts out an amazing Christmas dinner, complete with my mother's chocolate cake. What do you say? Want to be holiday roommates? And nobody in the hotel will think it's strange if a random woman and a random baby just start living with you. Not the strangest thing to grace the doors of my penthouse. Besides, a temporary but beautiful wife and child will make the holidays more bearable. The words popped out of his mouth before he could think better of them. Jules's brow arched. Upgraded already from roommates to wife and child. That was quick. Heat crept under the collar of his shirt. You know what I mean. So what are the stranger things that have graced the doors of your penthouse? If a sudden family isn't the weirdest thing. He paused, tilting his head in thought. Okay, this might be the weirdest thing. But my point still stands. We'll be more effective working together, and if the weather continues to be cold and snowy, you won't have to worry about commuting. Jules smiled and nodded. You're right. It does make sense. Let's do it. A grin spread across his face, and warmth bubbled up inside his chest. This was absolutely the wildest thing he'd ever suggested, ever stumbled upon. But it felt right. As he waited for Jules to pack a bag and get the baby ready to go outside again, his mind swirled with thoughts. She brought up a good point about the temporary wife and kid living in his penthouse. People absolutely would notice. Everyone took a high interest in who and what came up and down the elevators to his apartment. It was only natural, he supposed. As a 30-something eligible bachelor in Manhattan, his name came up frequently in the tabloids, and women often courted him aggressively. He could have anything and anyone he wanted within the world of women, but he rarely indulged. That didn't mean he didn't sometimes dip his toes into the waters, but really, he was too busy for a proper relationship, or even a superficial one, which he'd tried once. After that spectacular but beautiful failure with a woman he'd tried to keep around for public events and being seen, he realized that he needed to hold off on dating until he reached the pinnacle of his career. Family and relationship stuff could come after he reached the top, and he was close to that top, especially if his father made the announcement Mitch was expecting at the Christmas gala. Once Jules and Noelle were back in the car, anxiety started churning in his gut. Thinking about the gala always tied him up in knots. It wasn't about the event planning. He'd already seen Jules's plans and approved of them, but rather the cycling worry about whether his father was finally prepared to hand over the reins. Mitch had been preparing for this position since college, and one of the hardest parts about his climb was his father, Mitchell Sr. The man had exceedingly high standards, but not just in business, in every aspect of life. Since Mitch's mom had passed, his father had turned into even more of a hard-ass. And really, he could understand. The man was filling a void with work and perfectionism. But that need for control impacted his family, as well as it bled into every aspect of Mitch, his brother Josh, and their cousin Chris's lives. For Mitch personally, his father had always been extremely vocal about who Mitch allowed on his arm. It was Victorian-style classism. Only the best and most educated women could have a place in Mitch's life. Anything less than that was simply unacceptable. Things were different for his younger brother Josh. He'd shown no interest in taking over the company. If anything, quite the opposite. Not only did he get the girl, but he also got his dream job and home in Cedar Grove, which at this time of year looked like something out of a Hallmark Christmas movie. Then there was Chris. While he'd been raised alongside the brothers after his parents died, his cousin had never shown any interest in working for Mitchell Sr. Not for the first time, Mitch thought about what it would be like to walk away from Denton Hotels and do something entirely different. He hesitated to imagine what the blowback would be from his father. As it was, once he found out what was going on, he'd be furious, and Mitch worried that he would pull back from his planned big announcement, which meant that anything longer than temporary with Jules and Noelle would be positively disastrous. Still, he wanted to allow himself this little respite from his regular life. Bringing in Jules and Noelle promised to make the holidays a lot more interesting. And even though he had it all, anything a person could want, there was one thing he was sorely lacking in life: warmth.
Chapter 10. Jules, Tuesday. Jules yawned as she stumbled out of the bedroom in the bleary morning hours. This was day 3 in the penthouse, her second morning since deciding to become Mitch's holiday roommate, or wife, depending on how you looked at it. And it still seemed unreal. Using this place as her remote office was one thing. Cohabiting with Mitch, the COO hottie, was another altogether. In just 3 days, she'd come to appreciate all his different phases. Work Mitch, who wore the impeccable suits. Relaxed. After-dinner Mitch, who unbuttoned the work shirt and rolled up the cuffs of his sleeves. And then there was nighttime Mitch, her favorite one. The guy who wore those cotton tees and soft shorts and had an easy smile that lit her up inside. All those Mitches were the man of her dreams, so it was hard to choose which one she was more attracted to. And each time she caught herself fantasizing about him, while feeding Noelle or working on the gala planning, she tried to stop herself. But it didn't stop her from fantasizing about him in the shower each morning, thinking exclusively about what he might look like under those clothes. Blue-gray light filtered through the huge windows overlooking Manhattan. Noelle had woken up for a feeding, and now Jules needed some water. On her way to the kitchen, she heard some strange grunting. Tss, tss, yeah. She paused mid-stride, her entire body going rigid as she struggled to identify the strange noise. What the heck? She whipped around, trying to determine where it was even coming from. At night, the penthouse had a sepulchral air, completely cut off from the outside world save for the stunning view of the city. It wasn't like most rooms in a hotel, where you could hear the showers of your neighbor or the hurried footsteps of children above or below your room. In here, sound didn't seem to enter or escape, which made this even stranger. Jules tried to follow the noise, and it led her toward Mitch's side of the penthouse. She poked her head down the hallway to his bedroom, and the noises grew louder. Now there was huffing. Definite huffing. Light spilled out of an open doorway farther down, and she crept toward it. She poked her head into the doorway, squinting as her eyes adjusted to the bright light filling the room. She stared directly into a floor-to-ceiling mirror stretching across the opposite wall. And there was Mitch, bent into a very awkward triangle pose. Shirtless, sweaty, and impossibly muscled. Their gazes met in the reflection of the mirror, and shock crested his face. A second later, he tumbled out of his pose, landing on his butt. Hard. She put a hand over her mouth to stifle the giggles. Are you okay? Mitch sat up, draping his arm over a bent knee. He rubbed his face before dropping onto his back and groaning. I'm fine. Believe it or not, were you doing yoga? A helpless laugh escaped him. I was. There was something endearing about this perfect, rich hottie who also did yoga in his private gym and sometimes failed at a pose. She bit her lip, trying to rein in her mind before she fell into the abyss of hopeless attraction. I'm sorry for butting in. I didn't mean to interrupt or make you fall over. I heard some noises and I wasn't sure. More laughter shook out of him. I can only imagine what you were probably thinking. That it sounded like you were masturbating? Heat scorched through her cheeks, and she tried to push the thought away. That probably was not what he was getting at. Still, now that her mind had gone there, it was nearly impossible to reel it back in. No, I was... She had nothing available as an excuse or recovery. I wanted to make sure everything was okay. You know, it could have been the neighbors. Better to stop while she was ahead. Divert. Divert. You looked good. Your form, I mean. The form of your body, like the posture. This was getting worse. More embarrassing by the second. Like your teacher would be proud, you know? Mitch propped up on his elbows and looked at her with a curious smirk. His abs popped out in hard ridges sitting like that, and she couldn't rip her gaze off him, not even if a bomb exploded in the kitchen. Do you do yoga? Yeah. Sometimes she shrugged. Mostly when there's wine involved. He laughed again and pushed to standing. He grabbed a white towel on a nearby rack and ran it over the back of his neck as he approached her. When he got close enough, she remembered that she was here, like physically present in her just-woken-up glory. Mitch's perfect form had been so distracting that she'd forgotten all about herself. Dressed in booty shorts and a skimpy tank top, one glance in the mirror confirmed the embarrassing reality. She was hot for him, and it showed. Do you work out other than that? He asked, tilting his head. Now her cheeks were flaming. They had to be. She crossed her arms over her chest and affected the most casual stance she could muster. Yeah. Well, I mean, not really. Her brain was officially dissolved. He stopped a few steps away from her, his hands on his hips, that little white towel dangling over his shoulders. This man was perfect, absolutely perfect. That's surprising. I know. A Manhattanite who doesn't work out. No, I mean, you have a killer figure. I thought you hit the gym all the time. She jerked her gaze to his in shock. He couldn't be serious. What? She shook her head. You're kidding, right? His brows drew together. No, I'm serious. Have you looked at yourself in a mirror lately? He swung around, pointing at their reflections. She caught her deer-in-headlights look and straightened, trying to wipe some of the shock off her face. Well, thanks. My overworked and underfed lifestyle must be really paying off. He smirked. Don't tell me you're the type of woman who only orders salad at restaurants. Salad as a starter, she clarified, which may or may not be followed by an enormous steak. The smirk blossomed into a grin. There was something cocky about him now. Like catching him in his own oasis, messing him up and making him fall, had cracked something open between them, and now the truth could pour out. He thought she was hot. That's all she'd heard. That's all that mattered. And now her curiosity, as well as her vanity, was aroused. If he thought she was hot, what else might happen? You could have told me. I wouldn't have gone out of my way trying to arrange those vegetarian masterpieces the past 2 days. It was true. Mitch had made a big deal about bringing in healthy food from the hotel kitchen. Hey, everything has been delicious. I have no complaints, none at all. But I wouldn't mind a healthy slab of meat once in a while. He laughed, his gaze raking boldly over her. I guess that's what I get for trying to impress you. Now her entire body prickled with awareness. That gaze of his might as well have broken skin. Impress me? His attention made her bold now. That undercurrent of attraction wasn't only on her end. This morning confirmed it. Why would you have to impress me? I'm just your little old holiday roommate. He scoffed, taking another step closer. Beads of sweat rolled down his chest, and the very sight of him was like something from a fever dream. Trust me. There's plenty I need to impress here. Now her cheeks were flaming. They had to be. Her pussy clenched from wanting him nearer, wanting him on her. Like she'd imagined in the shower yesterday morning, and the morning before that, if she was being honest. I don't know about that, she said, her voice coming out shaky. If there's anyone who needs to do some impressing, it's me. You look like a Gucci ad. I'm more of a Target ad. A clearance Target ad. A laugh rocketed out of him, and he closed the distance between them. If you're a clearance Target ad, then you're the deal of the century. She laughed, but the knot rising in her throat knocked the sound sideways. He caressed the side of her arm with his fingertips, but not in a friendly way. Not in a, hey, we're just making jokes in the weight room way. No, his touch told her that he wanted things to go further. Jules got lost in his gaze. His caress was a command, and there was no way she'd disobey it. She pushed onto her tiptoes, urged forward by lust in the early hour and his near nakedness, and then their lips were touching. His mouth covered hers hungrily, eagerly, as if he'd been thinking about this kiss for days, too. They kissed again and again. His big hands cupped the sides of her face, and then a little whimper escaped her, unbidden, uncontrollable. The scent of him, the feel of him against her, it was almost too much. She'd never been kissed like this, and she could hear her mother in her head screaming that it was the trappings of luxury that had her floating in space. But no, this man's lips, which he parted so that his tongue could slip through, they were velvet in heat and confidence. When the kiss broke and he pulled back, his eyes were clouded with lust. She recognized that look, because it was the same thing that swirled through her, drugged by what just happened. Holy, she managed. He wet his bottom lip, his gaze stuck on her mouth. I've never been kissed like that, she whispered, then regretted admitting it. At 7 a.m., she hurried to add. Me neither, he said. And I should add, you kissed me. She laughed but stopped short once she caught the tones of a wail. Noelle, probably screaming her lungs out if she could hear it this far away from the bedroom. Oh no. Noelle. Hang on. Jules rushed out of the weight room, heart in her throat as she hurried to check on the baby. Back in the bedroom, Noelle was wriggling and fussing, so Jules scooped her up into her arms. Mitch entered a moment later, looking concerned. What's wrong? He asked. Just crying. Not sure, she lifted her up and patted her back in case it was gas. Almost immediately, the cutest little burp erupted from her. That was it, Mitch said, reaching out to stroke Noelle's cheek. Now she's a happy baby again. He held out his hands and Jules passed Noelle off, grinning as he rocked her and cooed at her like any loving daddy would. As always, her chest went tight as she watched him. He would make a great dad someday, if he ever had kids. Heck, the two of them would be great parents together. They'd already proven their teamwork and excellent cohabitation skills. It was only 3 days in, but it seemed promising. Maybe this was a sign. She and Mitch were a good fit. Except she needed to stop thinking these crazy thoughts. Intense early morning kisses and 3 days of sharing a penthouse didn't mean anything. She was here to work and share the responsibility of caring for Noelle. That was it. Why was that so hard to remember?
Chapter 11. Mitch. Mitch felt as though he was being reprimanded by the school principal as he tried not to squirm during the Zoom call with his lawyer and his family law expert sister, who was presently enjoying a cruise with her family. Mr. Denton, you are lucky Children and Family Services is so backlogged, or you and your friend Ms. Cardwell would probably be arranging for bail, Jenna Miller told him, as she scowled at him from where she was sitting. Mitch cringed outwardly, knowing his father would have a fit if that happened. We did reach out for help, but we either couldn't get through or they were closing. Jenna held up her hand. I get it. I do. But the law is the law, and if they wanted to go after you, they could have. They still can, she emphasized. Well, shoot. What do we do? While he didn't regret bringing baby Noelle back to the hotel, he also didn't want to go to jail. Well, as luck would have it, the director for CFS is an old friend. I've already spoken with her, and they've agreed to allow the baby to remain in your custody while they try to track down any family she might have. I understand you're cooperating with the police. Mitch nodded hard. We have. We've provided them with CCTV footage of the front of the hotel where the nativity scene is set up, and I've instructed security to cooperate immediately if they need anything else. The lawyer turned at some noise at her end and muted herself while she appeared to have a conversation with someone off camera. Turning her audio back on, she told him, Excellent. The baby will need to remain at the hotel until her family is located or alternate accommodations are arranged. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a vacation to enjoy. Mitch started to say thanks, but she'd already left the meeting. Sitting back in his chair, he blew out a breath. "Wow, Donovan, your sister. Tell her thank you when you next speak with her. She's good, isn't she?" "All right, I'm out. Try not to find any more children, Denton," Donovan said before leaving the meeting. Mitch closed his eyes and took several long, deep breaths. Given the dressing down he'd just received, he knew he was lucky things turned out the way they did. And he probably shouldn't be so ridiculously excited that Noelle would be sticking around a bit longer. That little girl had grown on him in such a short amount of time that his penthouse was going to be much too quiet once she left. He looked up when there was a knock at his door. "Come in." Mitch smiled when Jules walked in. "How did the call go?" she asked as she set down her laptop and binder. "Better than expected. She called in a favor or three, and Noelle will remain here while they try to find her family or arrange other accommodations for her. Oh, and we won't be arrested. Yet. Well, that's good, because I look terrible in orange," she told him as she sat up on the other side of his desk. Mitch couldn't help chuckling as he looked at her dressed in black again. "I'm pretty sure you would look amazing nude." He froze before blurting out, "Crap. What I meant to say is that you're so beautiful, you make the clothes. The clothes don't make you nice save, Denton." "Now tell me more about how you think I'm beautiful," she said, lifting her eyebrows and giving him an expectant look. He could feel his face flushing as he suddenly found himself tongue-tied. Well, you do know you're incredibly beautiful, right? I mean, you must be every guy's wet dream, and I really need to stop talking now. Where's Noelle?" He paused again and looked at her, sure that she would be angry at him for talking about her like that. He was relieved when he saw her laughing. "First, I'm not every guy's wet dream, but thank you for the compliment. And second, she's with Angie in the hotel daycare. So how about we pretend you didn't just say all that, and we get to work?" Her grin was contagious, and Mitch found himself smiling as he agreed with her. They spent the next few hours hammering out the last of the details for the gala. Well, Jules was. Mitch kept finding himself daydreaming. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about the kisses they'd shared in his weight room that morning, or the fumbled flirting he did here in his office, which made concentration difficult. Every time he glanced up at Jules, all he could see were those perfect pink lips, the way they'd smashed against his like she was starving for him. Naked, of course. Because he'd opened his big mouth in an attempt to respond to her self-deprecating comment and ended up putting his foot in his mouth. He was thankful to be sitting behind his desk, and even threats of arrest weren't enough to calm down his simmering arousal. Not with her so near. He cleared his throat, trying to snap himself out of the Jules fog. He tapped his foot, brushing something, then caught Jules's shy gaze flit his way. "Sorry," he said. "I thought you were playing footsie." He grinned, then brushed his foot against hers again. A blush stained her cheek. Man, this made his work day a lot more fun. Why hadn't he thought of this before? Not like finding an abandoned baby and asking a stranger to move in with him had ever been on his to-do list before. "Careful there," she warned. "Or what? You'll kiss me again?" His grin widened, and he sought out her foot, brushing it intentionally along her heel. "Exactly," she warned, her pretty lips puckering. Then someone knocked on the door. "Mitch?" his assistant Rose asked, poking her head in. "Oh, good. No new babies this time." Mitch laughed, waving her in. "See what you miss when you can't make it into the office because of a storm." "What's up?" "We have a problem." His heart sank when she said that. Rose knew him and his approach to work better than anyone, and over the years she'd come to be his right-hand woman. So when she said they had a problem, usually it was serious. The toy shipment for the Children of the World exhibit for the gala just arrived, but a lot of it is, how do I say it, unfinished. Mitch furrowed his brow. What now? The wooden toys are just blank. It's the darndest thing. She shook her head and sighed. Let's go check this out, shall we? He stood looking pointedly at Jules before heading out of the office. The most recent shipment had been set aside in the delivery bay at the back of the hotel. The box had already been opened, most likely when Rose checked it out. And sure enough, nearly half the toys were completely bereft of a design. Just naked wood objects. What the heck? Jules asked, picking up a very large red top in one hand and an unfinished top in another. And nobody noticed this? Mitch chewed on the inside of his lip as he thought about what to do. The gala was this Saturday. Sending this back in exchange for another shipment was out of the question. The company they'd chosen for this task required a 3-week turnaround on all orders, and he suspected a replacement order would be the same. I'm definitely getting a refund, Mitch said. But returning the toys is out of the question because we won't get them replaced in time. So the question is how to rectify the situation. Jules picked up a few other toys, a horse, a house, and a cow, and said, "Why don't we just paint them ourselves?" Mitch was quiet as he considered the idea. She picked up another finished toy. Most of the painting is really basic. 2, 3, maybe 4 colors, max. She shrugged, looking up at him. I think we could knock these out ourselves. Or, worst case scenario, set up a toy painting station for the older kids to occupy themselves. One of the staff could oversee it, just to make sure nobody goes around painting walls or dresses. What do you think? In an instant, all his tension dissipated. She was right, and more than that, he was excited about her ideas. That's great, Jules. Let's see how many unfinished toys there are first, then we can decide which direction to go. They unpacked the box, laying out all the toys according to their level of completion. They counted 150 unfinished toys. How many kids are we expecting for the gala? Jules asked. Probably 50 or so, not many, and usually never little ones like Noel. I'd say ages 5 and up. Perfect. So let's paint about 50 of these ourselves and leave the rest as a fun activity station for the kids. She assessed the laid-out toys, nodding, like she'd internally confirmed the decision. So that would be 100 unfinished toys we're leaving, he said. Right. Which means that some kids can paint 2 or 3. You never know which kid is going to want to paint one of each shape. It's a thing, I promise. Mitch looked over at her, resisting the urge to pull her into his arms. Not here in the loading bay, where everyone would see them. Back in his office, maybe. But up in the penthouse, definitely. He was so relieved he could have skipped back to the office, as they had a dock worker haul the toys on a cart behind them. Not because the toy problem was resolved. No, the wooden toys were honestly the least of his worries. It was the fact that he had a problem solver at his side. It felt good to have someone around him, willing to get creative and find a path forward. He was used to operating solo, with just Rose beyond his office door and his father dropping in with demands or requests. Having Jules at his side felt like having a partner in the messy business of running an empire. The toys were inconsequential. It was her attitude that really got him. Mitch called for supplies and sent out a call for other staff members to help with the painting. He divvied them up into piles of 20 and instructed managers to hand out the tasks to their willing employees. When the paints and tarp arrived at his office, they got to work painting their selection of toys. The first ones were a little shaky. Unsure lines, uneven eyes on the horse, a very weird grimace on the nutcracker. But by the time they hit their rhythm, the toys were coming out just as professional as the originals. Better, even. Because they were made by them, right here in his office, amid laughter and jokes, and plenty of references to those steamy kisses that morning in the weight room. Once they were finished, and it was almost quitting time for the day, Mitch noticed Jules had a streak of paint on her face. He reached over to wipe it off, but only spread more blue paint over the bridge of her nose as a result. He laughed. Oops, messed that up. She feigned insult and twisted around to look in the mirror near his desk. He could see himself in the reflection, and he crept closer to her over the tarp they'd laid out on the carpeted floor. She gasped when he came up behind her, their gazes locking in the mirror. "What is it about us and reflections?" she asked. When she turned to him, he didn't waste time. He surged forward on his hands and knees, capturing her lips in a kiss. She made that whimper noise again, the one that told him she wanted it as much as he did. They kissed eagerly, sloppily even, until Mitch pulled back. This needed to progress to the next level. "What?" He pulled her to standing, covering her mouth with his once more as he guided her backwards toward his desk. He tried to push some papers out of the way, but couldn't spare the attention. He hoisted her onto the desk. Something fell over, but he didn't care. She laughed through the kiss, though it faded when his fingertips slipped over the smooth skin of her legs. She'd worn a sharp black wraparound dress and equally sharp heels, all of which he was eager to tear off her immediately. He paused, breaking the kiss to search out a response in her gaze. Her chest heaved, her lips kiss-bitten. "Why did you stop?" That was all the answer he needed. They were doing this, right here, right now. Mitch didn't break the kiss as he jerked his shoulders out of his suit jacket and tossed it toward his chair. It crumpled to the ground a moment later, and Mitch ran his hands over the dip in her waist, seeking the flimsy ties of her dress. "Oh, Mitch," she breathed out with a moan. He tugged at the knot once, then again. It came undone, and the front of her dress spilled open, revealing the gorgeous landscape beneath. He finally pulled himself away from her lips, but the view was worth it. "Should we, here?" She swallowed, gaze darting all over his face. "In your office?" A knock interrupted them, and she jolted, grabbing for the ties of her dress. Mitch swore under his breath, raking a hand through his hair before scooping up his jacket. He had just slipped it on, Jules standing nearby smoothing down the front of her dress, when Rose poked her head in. "Still no babies," Mitch joked. He could hear the strain in his voice. "Come in." "Another delivery needs your signature," Rose said, pointing at him. "And the front desk needs you to come look at their toy painting contributions, because apparently someone got a little slap-happy with the emerald green." Mitch clenched his jaw. He glanced at Jules, finding the same contained heat in her gaze. A wave of understanding shivered between them. They'd finish this later.
Chapter 12. Jules. As soon as Jules arrived at Mitch's penthouse that evening with Noelle in her arms, the buzz of the service elevator rang through the apartment. Mitch poked his head into the foyer, where she was just setting down the diaper bag. "Don't move," he said, holding up a finger as he breezed toward the kitchen. Jules froze, not like he'd be seriously watching her to see if she moved a muscle. A moment later, footsteps scuffed through the penthouse, and a feminine voice trailed behind Mitch's booming greeting. "Here she is," Mitch said, gesturing toward her and the baby. A smiling employee stepped into the foyer after him, the same ruddy blonde who had watched Noelle yesterday with the hotel's babysitting services. "Oh," Jules offered a smile. "I just came from the babysitting services. Angie's going to stay up here while we go out," Mitch said, waving her forward. When she stepped close enough, he pressed a kiss to Noelle's forehead. Jules found Mitch's gaze, and the heat there made her breath evaporate. For a moment, it felt like he was going to kiss her, too. Or maybe she was just hungry for another one of his kisses. "Where are we going?" she forced out past the confusion. "Out." Mitch's smile turned mischievous. "I'll take the baby, and you go get ready." "But what?" "There's a package waiting for you on the bed," he said, easing Noelle into the crook of his elbow. He sent her a wink, and Jules drifted forward, feeling like she was floating on air. The nanny was here. Her pretend husband and baby daddy had the baby safely in his arms, and now they had a mysterious night out together. She felt like a pauper-turned-princess in one of those corny Christmas movies. Like Mitch had swept her away in his carriage, and now they were about to meet the King of England or something. She hummed to herself as she indulged in the fantasy, just for a little bit, even though the rational side of her was reminding loud and clear, "Don't get used to this. Rich men never stay around. You're just a plaything to him." A large white box sat on her neatly made bed. Excitement prickled through her arms, and she ran a finger over the corner. A stamp in the middle read "Elegance" in a swirly font. She pulled off the top, finding a neat nest of tissue paper inside. Her heart started racing, but she didn't know why. She'd never gotten a gift like this before. The excitement was almost too much to bear. What could it possibly be? And how could he possibly know anything about what she liked? She pushed her hands inside the tissue paper, fingertips meeting something silky below. She tugged the fabric out of the box, gasping as an elegant evening gown presented itself. Mossy green and delicate, and probably the most expensive thing she'd ever touched. A simple tag was pinned to the strap of the dress, emblazoned with the store's name and nothing else. Of course there was no price tag, though she was dying to know what something like this cost. She turned it over in her hands a few times, admiring the scooping neckline, the slight ruching below the waist. Mitch knocked softly on the door. "What do you think?" "I think I'm not worthy." She laughed, holding it up again. "More than worthy. Trust me, I know these things." He cocked a grin. "Put it on and let's go. I want to take us out to dinner, to celebrate our hard work and not being arrested today." She smiled, her throat clamping shut for some reason. Mitch excused himself, and she slipped out of her work clothes. The dress settled with a soft shush over her shoulders. Somehow he'd known her size. Maybe from sight alone. Or maybe one of his minions had come to spy on her clothes here in the guest bedroom, with this type of luxurious lifestyle. Who knew what Mitch's motives were? What sort of excess he truly had at his disposal? Oddly, the thoughts didn't settle as strangely as she'd been bred to expect. Even with her mother's bad experiences whispering in her ear, it was hard to say no to this. What was the harm in having a little fun? Just dipping her toe in silky comfort and a night out on the town? Jules hurried to dress, her heart racing as she touched up her makeup, curled her hair into soft waves, and slipped her feet into a pair of peep-toe heels. When she came into the living room, freshly spritzed with perfume and feeling every inch an elegant woman, Mitch was making faces at Noelle. He glanced up at her, a smile on his face. "Come over." "Oh, wow." She fought the grin. Yeah, she felt like "oh, wow" on legs. "You like it?" Mitch blinked a few times, his gaze stuck on her. Like is an understatement. Heat crept into her cheeks. This would be a very fun evening of make-believe. "It's so lovely. I absolutely adore it." "Thank you," Angie beamed at Jules from her spot on the couch. "Seriously beautiful dress. Little Noelle and I will be here when the two of you lovebirds get back." Jules replayed those words in her head no fewer than 100 times as she and Mitch went through the motions of leaving. Finding her purse, slipping on her winter coat, calling for the driver to meet them out front. Once the two of them were alone in the elevator, Mitch's gaze turned to pure fire. "I knew this dress would be a test." "Oh, yeah?" She inched closer to him, and he caught her by the waist. "What sort of test?" "A test of how long it will stay on you." His words scorched through her, and the space between them shrank. When he spoke next, his breath tickled her lips. "I intend to finish what we started today in my office." A weak laugh escaped her. "So this is just a ploy to get into my pants?" "Only if you want me there." She melted a little bit, and he took the opportunity to capture her lips in a kiss. Hot, needy kisses erupted from the first one. She whimpered as his mouth claimed hers over and over again. By the time the elevator dinged at the first floor, Her panties were soaked, and she wasn't sure she could make it through dinner without getting what she needed first. Mitch awakened something in her that she didn't quite understand. It wasn't the trappings of luxury, though those were nice. Something about his presence, the masculinity that rolled off him in waves, drove her wild. Every kiss spurred the need for 10 more. Every touch of his fingers to her skin made her desperate for him to wrap his arms around her. He made her needy and primal, eager to submit to her baser desires. The elevator doors whooshed open and they breezed out, the epitome of refinement. They didn't hold hands as they strode through the lobby, though her fingers itched to find the heat of his hand. She fought a grin the whole way as they walked past guests and wove around families, oohing and aahing at the enormous Christmas tree, which was now fully decorated with all the special ornaments. This felt like a secret, like a game that only they were playing while the rest of the world was none the wiser. Had her mother played like this with her rich suitors? This didn't seem so bad. In fact, it was fun. Until you find out about his secret wife and kids halfway across the world. Her mother's voice slammed through her, jostling her out of her great mood. When they stepped out into the frigid air of downtown Manhattan, all her thoughts blew away in the wind. She wrapped her coat around her, sliding into the back seat of the car with Mitch behind her. Once the toasty car was on the road, she snuggled into Mitch's side. "Where are we going?" "It's a surprise." She scoffed. "You and your surprises. They're one of life's great pleasures." His mysterious smile warmed her, and looking up at him in this moment was something she wanted to remember forever. Maybe it was the sparkle in his eye, the promise of a great evening. Or maybe it was the promise of what might simply exist between them, where this make-believe mommy and daddy time could lead. She didn't like thinking about the future with him, because she knew it was a reckless idea. This thing between them, it was just convenience. It was for the holidays. It was because of Noel. So why would she think that anything more could exist? After Christmas, they'd be back to their normal lives, normal routines. Sans baby, the gala behind them. That's all this was. A holiday dalliance, something to pass the time and excite the senses. She needed to remember that. 10 minutes later, the car pulled up to the front doors of a little restaurant named GLOW. Mitch held the door open for her, and a cozy brick and steel beam space awaited them. Except the entire place was empty. Every single table bare, not even set or waiting for guests. A hostess greeted them a moment later, leading them toward the back of the restaurant. "Is this place, not open yet?" she whispered as they followed her. "I bought it out for the evening." Her eyes widened. Now there was another significant bump to an already expensive evening. First the dress, then the private rental of an entire restaurant. Her mind spun as the hostess seated them at a small table near a crackling fireplace. On the other side of the room, a musician was just sitting down at a baby grand piano. "Oh my God," she whispered as they eased into their chairs. "Did you hire him too?" His mischievous smile told her everything she needed to know. And at this point, all she could do was soak it up. It was all so outrageous, so over the top. Maybe this was what dating a billionaire felt like. And if that was the case, she'd have a lot to get used to. Except number. She wasn't dating a billionaire. This was temporary. Nothing more than a bit of fun. But as she looked up into Mitch's warm blue gaze, she wasn't so sure temporary was going to be enough.
Chapter 13. Mitch. Dinner blurred by with soft classical music and exquisite plates of gourmet food. 6 courses, 2 bottles of wine, and one amazing evening. By the time they left GLOW, Mitch felt like he himself was glowing, and Jules sure was. He'd never seen her so loose, so alive. Sure, the wine probably helped that. But they'd burst out into raucous laughter more times than he could even count. They were on a date because he'd made it happen, because he'd brought her here. But he suspected they would be having an equally great time almost anywhere in the city, even if they decided to stay in the penthouse and order in. The ride back to the hotel was spent in a perma-kiss, Mitch's hands pushing the flowy hem of her skirt higher and higher up her thighs. By the time the car reached the front of the hotel, he didn't think he could get out of the car without embarrassing himself. "I might need to sit out here for a while," he said, wetting his bottom lip as his gaze dragged over the width of her hips. "But I can't look at you for another second, or I'll have to do something about it." Jules giggled, her gaze darting toward the driver. "We should go inside." Mitch heaved a sigh, reluctant to let her out of his sight, but it was for the best. "Okay, yes, let's go inside." She sent him a private smile and stepped out of the car, letting in a cold blast of air. Mitch ground his jaw, unable to watch anything other than the sway of her hips as she strutted toward the front doors. Once she was inside, he pushed out of the car and hurried after her. She had him feeling like a teenager again. One sexy look would have him covering his crotch in public. Jules waited for him with a sly smile in the lobby, and he quickly caught up with her. He made sure to keep his distance as they walked toward the penthouse elevator. But not because he was worried about what her touch might do to him, because he couldn't let spying eyes see. The infrequent staff members who came to his penthouse were one thing. They were sworn to secrecy and paid for their discretion. But the rest of the hotel staff, they loved to gossip about him, and more than a few incriminating things had leaked from his own hotel to the tabloids in earlier years. So now, he knew better than to flaunt his personal life. The worst part wasn't even the tabloids. It was his father. Mitch tapped his foot as they awaited the elevator, deciding to stuff his hands inside his coat pockets, lest they wander too close to Jules. Once the door slid open, he nearly pushed her inside. She giggled as he cornered her against the glass wall. The elevator lurched into motion. "What would you say?" he began, running his thumb along her jawline. "If we had a little fun in here? Like, get it on in the elevator?" Her voice came out a squeak. He nodded, and her eyes went wider. "That would be... are you sure we can?" "This is my elevator," he said, brushing his lips against hers. "My hotel, my penthouse. We can do whatever we want." Those words must have been the key to unlock her, because she wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him into a hungry kiss. When he had her cradled between his body and the unyielding wall of the elevator, a sigh escaped him. "Enjoying this?" she mumbled through a kiss. He grunted. "Enjoying is an understatement." He groped behind him, fingers seeking the panel near the elevator doors. He finally ripped himself away to find the stop button and pressed it. The car ground to a halt. Jules giggled. "I've never been so naughty in an elevator before." He smoothed his lips along her jawline, relishing the taste of her, a mixture of sweetness and spice. "Me neither." "That surprises me." With this elevator at your disposal, and all desire rippled through him, completely overtook him. He shifted against her and must have hit the right spot because her eyes fluttered shut and she moaned. "Yes, Mitch." Her voice was a plea he couldn't ignore. He could barely think straight. This heady combination of lust and satisfaction would entirely undo him. "You want more of this?" Her breath hitched. Her fingernails dug into his arms as she arched against him. "Please." A sly smile curved her lips, and just the sight of her swollen, kiss-bitten lips nearly sent him over the edge. Jules drove him wild in a way that he could barely explain. She was more than a gorgeous woman. Jules felt inexplicably like a partner. If he had stumbled upon Noelle with anyone else, where would that person have ended up? Probably not backed up against the penthouse elevator wall. All the air in his lungs disappeared in a whoosh. His mind blank and buzzing, pinpricks already crowded together along his arms and legs. Sure, it had been a while since he'd been with a woman. But with Jules, this was something else. Their connection sent him into the stratosphere. After, his lips found Jules's in a sloppy, sated kiss. She was grinning through the kiss, and she was almost a dead weight in his arms. My thoughts exactly. He didn't hurry to lower her to her own 2 feet. He liked the weight of her in his arms, liked this messy spread in the elevator. Maybe we should continue this in my apartment. Her eyes snapped open, and the sexy glint he found there was the only answer he needed.
Chapter 14. Wednesday. Jules. Mitch had meetings most of the day, which meant that Jules had the penthouse to herself. She hummed as she drifted through the living room, headed for the little desk facing the floor-to-ceiling window. This was her work nook. She'd christened it as such on day 1. And whenever this holiday reverie ended, she'd be extra sad to give this aspect up. Although now there were a few more aspects she was hesitant to give up. Mitch's gravely moans in her ear being one of the major ones. A shiver ran up her spine as she recalled their epic night together. What had started in the elevator, once the nanny was dismissed and the baby quietly asleep in her crib, progressed from living room to kitchen to workout room to Mitch's bedroom. And that dinner the night before? She'd never felt so doted on, so she wanted to surprise him. Like a thank you gift, except nothing handwritten or involving a registry. Jules planned on thanking him the only way she knew how, through cozy Christmas decorating and cooking. Since she'd taken up residence in the penthouse, it wasn't hard to use free moments gala planning to turn her attention toward the apartment. With Christmas days away, Mitch showed a startling lack of decoration. A place this big and amazing deserved to look spectacular. And with so many resources at his disposal, Mitch had no excuse not to dive headfirst into the Christmas spirit. So Jules did some investigating, made some calls to different assistants in the hotel, and got the gears in motion. First up, a real tree. Rose had mentioned there were extra trees left from the lobby displays that they'd yet to find homes for. Then, ornaments of all shapes and sizes, the leftovers from the lobby decorations. Once the tree was up, dressed and lit, the place still didn't seem quite finished. She arranged for any and all extra decorations and garland to be sent up in the service elevator as well. And sure, maybe her workday had been primarily spent tracking down these decorations and finding appropriate places for all of them. But it was a worthwhile surprise, one that would pair very well with the chicken roasting in the oven alongside a full tray of vegetables. Jules knew how to make a home even homier, and that was the best gift she could give to Mitch right now. Noelle arrived home first in the arms of the nanny. Jules received the yawning, sleepy-eyed girl with a big grin. How was she today? A breeze as usual, but I noticed she's a bit sniffly. She might have a cold coming on, Jules thanked the nanny, heading to the couch to give Noelle her bottle and hum her a song. Once she'd been burped and her diaper changed, Noelle's eyes drifted closed. Just as Jules was swaying her to sleep, the front door opened. A moment later, Mitch came into the living room with wide eyes, looking around like he'd stepped into the wrong house altogether. What? Shh. Jules grinned, jerking her chin toward Noelle. She's about to fall asleep. Mitch clamped his mouth shut, setting his briefcase on the couch before heading their way. Something warm shone in his eyes, and he didn't take his gaze off her. Not for a second. What is all this? He asked in a softer voice. Her grin spread so wide her cheeks hurt. What is what? Don't play coy. My penthouse looks like a magazine ad for Christmas itself. Good. Then my work here is done. She swayed away from him, flirtation bursting to life between them. He tilted his head, wetting his bottom lip as he looked her up and down. You're cooking something. Correct. Now her ears hurt from smiling so hard. She hadn't known it was possible. What are you making? I have a sleepy baby to tend to, she said, turning away from him slightly. You're just going to have to wait and find out. She sashayed away from him, feeling his questions and amusement burning in the air behind her. The walk to the bedroom had allowed Noelle to drift off to sleep, so Jules set the sleeping girl in her crib and came back to the living room. Mitch had removed his tie and undone the first few buttons of his shirt. He was pouring a tumbler of whiskey just as she entered. Wow, so early? Mitch sighed, bringing the glass up to his lips. Sometimes I need something to mark the transition into the evening. Sounds like you had a rough day. She came up to him, overcome by the urge to care for him, to erase the stress showing in his face and the weariness that clung to him. She wrapped her arms around his waist and looked up at him, shocked by how natural the gesture felt. Sure, they'd had plenty of sex the night before. But was this sort of intimacy welcome? Or even allowed? This type of intimacy had them moving from sex with abandon into tell me all your woes territory. Mitch downed his drink, then sighed through a grimace as he set the glass down. His big hand smoothed over her shoulders and then ran down her back. A shiver raced through her. That's sweet of you to say, not the reaction she'd been expecting. She couldn't tell if he was touched by her insight or just politely sidestepping her interest. Want to talk about it? His jaw worked back and forth, his gaze distracted but bright as he searched her face. Wouldn't even know where to begin. Complaints from guests who were frustrated that it snowed earlier this week and they weren't able to go do touristy things because everything was closed. Jules rolled her eyes at that, which made him chuckle. My father, of course, wanted an update on the gala, which I gave him. The reservation software we used decided to glitch, so I had to place a call to the developer. He was able to connect remotely to upload the updates to get us back up surprisingly fast. Well, that's good news, she told him. It was. Although Gabe Elkin wasn't particularly happy with me calling him at 5 a.m., he chuckled at that before adding, his company just had a successful product launch and he's been putting in late hours and had only been asleep for a couple of hours when I woke him. Oh well, lucky him. He got to sleep in. She deadpanned, and Mitch grinned at her. That's exactly what I told him, although he didn't see the humor in it. He did warn that he would be adding a PITA fee to his invoice. Jules frowned. PITA fee? He wants you to send him bread? Mitch shook as he laughed. Now there's an idea. I'll have to mention that next time. Number, PITA stands for pain in the ass, since I called him rather than his company's tech support line. She snickered. So does this mean my surprises are well-timed? He hugged her, smiling, the one that made his dimple flash. Yeah, more well-timed than you could have realized. Come here. Let me show you around. She took his hand in hers and started a slow walk around the penthouse, showing off all the different touches and accoutrements that she'd added. They stood for a long time at the tree, admiring the different ornaments, the golden baubles, the dangling icicle-like tendrils, the sparkly tinsel draped over the evergreen limbs. Because of the tree's height, she'd added a mix of twinkle lights and larger lights, which cast the room in a soft glow. She draped the evergreen garlands across the mantel and around the doorways, complete with large ribbons and more twinkle lights. A train tooted its horn, and he looked down to see the train making its way around the base of the tree. Oh, wow. He squatted down and watched as it made a turn around the track. I haven't seen this since we were kids. My mom always set it up like this, and when we were little, my brother, our cousin, and I would send things to each other via train. Where did you find it? In storage in the basement. I'd asked for help finding decorations, and it was in one of the boxes that was brought up. Everything looks so beautiful. Thank you for doing this, Mitch said, rising and sliding his hand over the small of her back. Well, Christmas is my specialty. And I can't believe you didn't have this done already. Christmas is coming up soon. Mitch's smile slowly faded, his brows drawing together. But your place wasn't decorated either. Her mouth parted. Right. But you have this place. This place deserves to be decorated. And yours doesn't? His question made her think. Her house had always been her safe haven until her most recent move to a smaller, more affordable apartment just made her uninterested in unpacking and really inhabiting the place. Fair point. But I haven't lived there very long, and I have to confess, I've had zero interest in unpacking the rest of my boxes. I know I need to, because as I'm sure you saw, there's cardboard boxes stacked all over the place. But she shrugged, not sure what else to say. It's more fun decorating other people's places. Jules nibbled at her lip, thankful he wasn't pushing for more information. It definitely is, especially when the place is as beautiful as yours. Well, the place looks great. You've clearly got a knack for this sort of thing. Thanks. She smiled up at him, but something in her chest hurt. His words had cracked something open. She just wasn't sure yet what it was. You hungry? Starving. Great. Let me feed you now. She squeezed his hand and led him into the dining room. After a stern command for him to sit his butt down, she got the plates and silverware out, and then loaded up a fancy white serving platter with the roasted chicken and vegetables. Mitch's gaze didn't leave the food as she brought everything over. Wow, it smells divine, but it looks even better. She swatted at his arm once the dish was on the table. You're just saying that. I haven't forgotten about last night's dinner, by the way. That reminds me. Mitch set aside his napkin and went to the wine rack in the kitchen. He returned a moment later with a bottle and a corkscrew. A 2008 Malbec from Argentina. What do you think? I think you should open that immediately. She slid into her seat, trying to fight the same perma-grin that had strained her cheeks earlier. Holy crap, this was a lifestyle she could get used to. Easygoing evenings after a workday, punctuated with surprises and warm embraces and fine wine. Even though she loved Christmas, this was one time she wished it would never arrive. So she could extend this sweet little romance? Fling? Something more? Or something less? It was hard to know. Noelle made things muddy, but the passion between her and Mitch made things clear at the same time. There was something real between them. But Jules couldn't tell if it was real in the way that lasted. Once she'd filled their plates with food and he'd poured the richly dark wine, they clinked glasses and took appreciative sips. A moan escaped her. It's so good. Sounds like you're on the elevator again, Mitch remarked. She snickered, heat creeping up her neck. I guess the sensations are similar. Enjoying excellent wine and being ravished. Ravished. A cool smirk crossed his lips. You make it sound like a romance novel. It sorta was. Just way hotter than any romance I've ever read, she said. It's good to know that I'm better than a book hero. Book boyfriend, she corrected him. That's what they're called, and you're way better than a book boyfriend. His smirk turned mischievous. So, what you're saying is sex with me is better than everything else you've tried? Oh, he wanted to play this game, did he? She sat back in her chair and took a sip of her wine and stared at him, pretending to be deep in thought. Well, I wouldn't go that far. That dinner we had last night was spectacular, and this wine, she held up the glass, is amazing. Well then, challenge accepted. Mitch sat back, mimicking the way she was sitting, drank his wine, and watched her over the top of his glass. Jules could feel heat sweeping across her cheeks, wondering if she was in over her head flirting with the billionaire sitting across from her. She sipped again, already feeling drunk, though it was impossible after so little wine. Really, she suspected it had more to do with the man in front of her than anything else. We all need challenges to aspire to. Even me. And I don't run a hotel empire. He cut into the roasted chicken, his gaze flicking between her and his plate as he became serious. True, although I don't technically run it. But you will. Yes, I will. But his words didn't sound confident. He stuffed a forkful of chicken into his mouth, his gaze growing cloudy. He looked out over the city as he chewed. You sound like you doubt it. Jules was regretting saying anything because their playful banter had shifted over to something more serious. He swallowed, gaze returning to the plate. This is excellent. Thanks, did you hear me? Yes, I'm just ignoring you. He reached for his wine. Sorry, if you'd rather not go there, we don't have to. I can talk instead about the roasting technique I used or the exact number of ornaments on the tree. How many? His sharp gaze cut up to her, and she sucked in a quick breath. She might never not be affected by those eyes. 42. He nodded sagely. Good number. So why do you doubt your future running the hotel? His lips quirked up at the corners. So you don't take a hint. She chewed on a potato wedge, grinning over at him. Not always. Sometimes I like to ignore them. I won't be confident my father will hand the reins over until he actually does. Mitch shrugged. That's all. But why wouldn't he? Mitch crumpled a little, but he straightened quickly. My father is enigmatic, to say the least. He's always put a lot of pressure on me as the first child. Pressure my brother never got. What sort of pressure? To act a certain way, to be seen a certain way. Mitch shook his head, dabbing at his mouth with his napkin. It was a lot growing up, and it got so much worse after my mom died. I never understood why he tried to control my life so much. I hated it so much that I even vandalized one of his properties when I was 16. He told me I couldn't date the girl in my music class, so I lashed out. Jules blinked. Wow, did he ever find out? Mitch shook his head. And I've never told anyone. So, congratulations. You've got information for blackmail? I solemnly swear I will not share this tantalizing vandalism tidbit. Good. Mitch stuffed another forkful of chicken in his mouth. After he chewed, he said, Now you have to give me some blackmail tidbit. Do I? He nodded. It's the rules of the penthouse. She hummed as she thought, tipping her head back and forth. She didn't quite have anything as illegal or urchin-like as vandalism, but she did have something that called her whole stint as Noelle's caregiver into question. Fine. I'm not as capable of a caretaker as I probably seem. She folded up her napkin, surprised by the way her chest tightened as she readied to spill the beans. I worked as a nanny to help pay for college, and one of the kids I was watching fell and broke his leg on my watch. Mitch blinked. And? He went to the hospital, and I quit being a nanny. She reached for her wine. That's not blackmail worthy. It is. Because I made it seem like it was his fault. But if I had been watching more closely, if I had been closer to him... He smirked, shaking his head. No way. That stuff happens. Kids fall. It's part of life. She sighed. Well, you weren't there. And honestly, the stress was too much. I'm constantly wondering if I'm going to hurt Noelle somehow. Mitch scoffed. You are wonderful with her. Trust me, you are 100 times better with her than I am. His words were sweet, but she still waved them off. He was undeterred. Have you ever noticed how fast she falls asleep in your arms compared to mine? Yeah, but that's different, Jules said. She had nothing to follow it with when Mitch asked her, How? He smiled. Just admit it. You're great with her. And one child falling off a jungle gym does not make you incapable. Jules fought a grin as she forked some more vegetables into her mouth. He had a point. But more than that, she was touched by how deftly he'd fought to lift her spirits. It had worked. And that sort of investment in her well-being was almost sexier than anything else about him. Chapter 15. Jules. Once dinner was cleared away and Noelle was up for another feeding and some playtime, Jules was buzzing with warmth and happiness. She hadn't counted on loving these moments so much. The routine of waking up with Noelle, coming home to her after a day of work, and spending the evening in a family. Because for all intents and purposes, that's what Noelle and Mitch were to her right now. Her family during the coziest, most family-oriented holiday time of the year. Jules's own mother lived in upstate New York, and they rarely spent the holidays together anymore. Not since her mother had taken a job at a nursing home and usually spent the holidays working, so those with families at home could enjoy the time off. Not that Jules minded very much. As much as she loved her mother, the idea of spending the holidays listening to her complain about everything from who Jules was or wasn't dating, where she lived, or that she didn't call her mother enough got old quick. Beyond her mother, she had no other living family. Sure, she had plenty of friends, but those friends had their own families, their own celebrations, their own warm and cozy nooks to get back to. Noelle and Mitch entering her life was incredibly well-timed, and her heart was thankful for it. The idea of enjoying a spectacular Christmas this year without all the parental angst that often went along with hers was a dream come true, and she couldn't think of anyone else she'd want to include other than Mitch and Noelle. Once the baby was back in her crib, Mitch led her by the hand through the penthouse. Jules followed him in a floating daze, unable to rip her gaze off the half-unbuttoned work shirt or the well-trimmed stubble on his jaw each time he glanced back with those smoldering eyes. This man was a fantasy. Better than a fantasy, even. Because in the dreamily tinted stories that little girls fell for, it was only for a handsome man of no substance. Mitch was all substance. Solid and sturdy and successful, not to mention sexier than sin. The type of guy to build her up and back her up against the elevator wall. He kicked the door shut behind her with his foot, leaving the bedroom bathed in moody golden light from the city beyond the window. He didn't use curtains, preferring to rise with the daylight, and the Manhattan glow filled the bedroom. Even at night, the city was bright enough to light their way as his mouth covered hers, and they started a slow stumble back toward the bed. Mitch's warm hands cupped her face. She whimpered through the kiss, the mix of his heat and his tongue seeking hers and the solid steel of his body against her creating a vortex of desire she could only get lost in. When they reached the bed, she fell backward onto the soft comforter. He paused, fishing his phone out of his pocket. "Baby monitor," he whispered, swiping through screens. Once he opened the app that would alert them if Noelle started fussing, he tossed it farther up the bed, where it settled near the pillows. "I'm glad you're clear-headed enough to think of these things," Jules joked, desperation swarming her. She held her arms up and he returned to her. The gentleness of it, the sweet caress of his hands, was so welcome that it made Jules's throat tight. She hadn't realized she was missing intimacy like this. If she were honest, she'd never had intimacy like this with anyone. Mitch was on a whole different level. This man was everything she'd always wanted. The secret hope she'd held in the back of her mind was that he felt the same way about her. Oh, Jules. Her name on his lips was an aphrodisiac. Her throat went tight, emotions swirling inside her from head to toe. How could she not fall for this man? This nurturing foster father to Noelle? The thoughtful, successful businessman? The giving lover? Her heart squeezed as his lips found hers again. It was the kiss that did it. The tender caress of his lips. It was official. She was head over heels. After he immediately scooped her into his arms, bringing her body flush against his. She giggled, sinking into the spoon. Now this was nice. He buried his face in the back of her hair. Words were still beyond her. With this level of satisfaction pulsing through her, it might be a while until she could string words together. Mitch kissed the top of her head. That settles it then. Best sex ever. Her eyes drifted shut, that perma-grin back out to play on her lips. Definitely. Chapter 16. Friday. Jules. Jules's memories of her epic orgasms were one of the few things keeping her going today. That along with way too much caffeine and an overindulgence in chocolate. Children and family services had had no luck yet in tracking down Noelle's family. Someone from the police department had stopped by to get her footprints with the hopes that they might be trackable through hospital records, but they'd yet to hear back. And no one seemed particularly interested in placing the baby with a different family, which was partly to do with the fact that the little girl was officially sick with a cold, which meant she couldn't join the hotel daycare, and the only nanny available went home sick. So Jules spent the last 2 days fretting over the sick little girl, every little cry or whimper jerking her focus from any task at hand. At least the gala planning was almost complete. The tables were already set up and the seat assignments were finalized. The chef had put together a tasting sampler of the planned menu, and Jules, along with Rose, Patrick, and a few other employees, sat down with her to taste all the food. But a couple of the dishes weren't quite right, and Jules couldn't explain why. Then a younger man who looked a lot like Mitch showed up. He introduced himself as Mitch's cousin Chris. Jules had been shocked to meet the chef Chris. He'd agreed with her assessment and popped into the hotel kitchen and a few minutes later came out with an alternative selection of appetizers and an amazing vegetable side dish that Jules had fallen in love with. It was so tasty. As appreciative as she was for his help, she was missing Mitch. He'd been leaving the penthouse before she awoke, only returning in the late evening after both Jules and Noelle had headed to bed. Both Rose and Patrick told her this was typical for the future CEO, which probably explained why the man didn't have a family beyond the temporary one currently residing in his penthouse. A family he'd spent very little time with the past 2 days. By 6 p.m. on Friday, she was craving another slow, intimate night with him so badly she could cry. But Noelle was as fussy as ever and only wanted to be held, so the romantic sexathon would have to wait. "Oh, honey." Jules patted Noelle's back after her latest bottle. Her little nose was stuffed up and she couldn't breathe very well, which only frustrated her more. Jules sank back onto the couch, a sigh escaping her as her eyes fluttered shut. Maybe if Noelle calmed enough, they could both snag a nap. That would be wondrous, almost too wondrous to imagine. The front door opened and Jules perked up. It had to be Mitch, which signaled sweet, sweet relief. She could hand over fussy Noelle and either sleep or get some work done. Probably sleep, if she was honest. Oh, how lovely that would be. "Anybody home?" Mitch walked into the living room a moment later, a big smile on his face. It dimmed slightly as he approached them. "You okay?" She groaned, dropping her head back on the couch. So exhausted. "It's been a rough day," Mitch frowned, reaching out to run his fingers over Noelle's head. "She still sick?" "Not getting any better. And I need to sleep, at least for an hour. Are you ready to take her?" Mitch's frown deepened. "I can't. I just stopped back to change for my next meeting. I've got an investor arriving in 15 minutes. Jules ground her teeth, unable to stop the annoyed sigh from bursting past her lips. "Seriously? You've been unavailable for the past 2 days? I thought we were in this together." "We are," Mitch insisted. "But this stuff is non-negotiable. I can't bail on this meeting to play with the baby." "To play with the—" She stopped herself before her acidic tone turned into even more acidic words. "Noelle is sick, and she needs to be cared for." "Whatever. I'll take care of it." Mitch headed for his bedroom, his voice growing more distant as he walked away. "Call the nanny. I'm sure she can help out for a few hours." "You think I haven't tried that route?" Jules spat, feeling more frustrated than ever. She couldn't get past what he'd said. Play with the baby. Like this was all fun and games. "There's no nanny available tonight because they're busy with all the other guests' children." But of course he couldn't hear her, because she was muttering angrily to herself in the living room. When he reappeared a few moments later, wearing a Henley shirt and casual slacks, the sight of him softened her frustration for a moment. "This is a meeting?" she asked. "Yeah. Casual, though. Per the investor's request." She sighed. "Well, as I was saying, there's no nanny available tonight. So make it quick, because I might not make it past 9 p.m. He came over and pressed a kiss to her forehead and then Noelle's. "Promise." The front door clicked shut a moment later, and she was left in irritable silence once more. Her own frustrations and to-do list and sense of aloneness boiling over, ready to drown her. So this was mom life in the early months. Now she got it. She sighed, settling Noelle into a safe spot on the couch before getting up to pour herself a glass of wine. It was 6:30. This was allowed. Noelle fell into a fitful nap, which allowed Jules to open her laptop and stare distractedly at her screen while thinking about the interaction with Mitch. It had felt like they were working together so well as a team, but now? All this just reminded her that she'd been in some sort of blazing bright foster baby moon, tinted by the holidays and the great sex and a healthy sleeping baby. Now Jules was dealing with sleep deprivation and deadlines with half the help and support she'd grown accustomed to. If Mitch couldn't be counted on to help during a few stressful days during their time as a makeshift family unit, then what could she count on from him in a relationship overall? And why was she even thinking that a relationship with him was a possibility? Yes, she'd fallen head over heels for him. Even now, when she wanted to throttle him for leaving her with a sick baby for the second day in a row, she still wanted to spend time with him. To listen to him talk about his day, and for Jules to share hers. To be on the receiving end of one of his smiles or the butterflies that danced inside her when he leveled her with one of his looks. But what did he feel about her? Was he even thinking about what might happen after the holidays? Because if Jules had her way? Playing the role of heroine in a Hallmark Christmas movie, she'd take up permanent residence in this penthouse. She'd already imagined moving her things here, thinking how convenient it was that she hadn't fully unpacked at her apartment. What an unwitting foresight that would make life easier once she decided to make the move over here. And little Noelle would of course become theirs, and probably would take the Denton name. And if Jules was lucky, so would she. Since Mitch would most likely, probably definitely, ask her to marry him within a year. All these thoughts felt ridiculous and dangerously hopeful, yet she couldn't avoid them. Despite her mother's constant warnings not to grow too attached to men, that the richer they were, the less likely they would stick around when they were needed most. He made her excited again for a life she'd only ever wished for, and never thought she could have. Her thoughts were interrupted by a brash ringing, something between an alarm clock and a tornado warning, ringing repeatedly from somewhere. Jules leapt to her feet, trying to track down the source of the offending noise. Her first thought was the service elevator. Maybe there was an issue with it and someone was stuck inside. But the noise was softer over that way. She wandered through the kitchen, following it until the sound rang the loudest. The mahogany buffet in the dining room seemed to be the culprit. She frowned, tugging open the small drawers in the piece of furniture until she spied the offender. Something suspiciously similar to a fitness tracker blared, and she picked up the thin black wristlet, turning it over in her hands. The accessory had startling volume for being so small, and no amount of pressing buttons made it shut up. Her chest tightened as she struggled to turn it off, but the alarm continued ringing. The failed attempts made a baby headache spring to life, and she swore under her breath. After enough frustrating attempts, she tossed the thing against the wall, as if this would help, or maybe prompt it into shutting off on its own accord. But no. Reap. 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 The end-of-time step tracker continued its death wail. Jules huffed with a sigh and headed for her phone. Now that she'd spent so much time hating the thing, it was all she could hear, even as she put distance between herself and the accessory. She tapped out a quick text to Mitch, but the waiting grew unbearable. So she called him. It rang 7 times and then clicked over to voicemail. She called again. And it went to voicemail again. Well, crap. She pinched at the bridge of her nose, her blood pressure pitching upward. Sleep deprivation and sick baby was one thing. Add a shrieking device on top of everything, and she was close to meltdown mode. Noelle stirred on the couch, and then she let out a wail. Oh no. Jules stomped her foot and looked between baby and device, unsure which to attend to first. Maybe she could break the thing with the meat tenderizer she'd found in the kitchen the other day. If it didn't stop ringing, she couldn't be held accountable for her actions. But Noelle needed comforting first. She scooped up the baby, trying to stop the crying. While she shushed Noelle and tried to get her calm, Jules drifted back toward her phone. She called Mitch again. No answer, but she couldn't stay in here. Not with the alarm beeping at her. So she headed for the hallway to check herself out in the mirror. She was presentable enough, at least for a quick trip to the bar where she knew Mitch was having his meeting. She could steal him for a few minutes to resolve this problem, and all would be well. She pasted a fake smile on her face as she slipped her flats on and went to the penthouse elevator, readying herself to enter the world below with a fussy baby in her arms. Yeah, everything would be fine, as long as Mitch stopped the alarm.
Chapter 17. Mitch. Mitch gnawed at the inside of his lip as he waited for Sarah to return. His meeting with the investor was casual at her request, but he hadn't expected it to be this casual. Sarah had shown up to the hotel bar in a form-fitting red dress and sky-high heels. After a quick hug and plenty of giggles, she'd suggested they start the meeting with shots. Like they were in college again, she'd laughed. And of course, Mitch had gone along. Taking a shot didn't sound like a horrible idea, especially after the day he'd had. With his dad breathing down his neck to get everything in order for the gala and secure the investments for the next level of Denton's expansion, he had enough on his plate to warrant having a drink or two. But he felt like a jerk for leaving Jules and Noelle in the penthouse, and no amount of alcohol could prevent his thoughts from returning to his girls upstairs. "Okay, I'm back." Sarah sent him a toothy grin as she slid onto the bar stool at his side. Her floral perfume settled in a cloud around him, something he remembered from the last time they'd met like this. She was one of their primary investors, but more than that, she was an old family friend. The daughter of another wealthy family in the New York area, she and Mitch were on equal footing when it came to wealth and inheritances. She was also Mitchell Sr.'s #1 pick as the ideal daughter-in-law. "What do you say to another shot?" She laughed, waving down the bartender. "I mean, we don't have anywhere to be, right? And if we get too drunk to go home, it's not like you don't have 1,000 rooms at your disposal." She winked, and Mitch could see through to the real meaning of her words. Sarah was not quiet about the fact that she wanted Mitch. She probably would be thrilled if their parents encouraged an arranged marriage for them, even if the very idea of it made his skin crawl. Sure, Sarah was gorgeous. She was the definition of a fun-loving, single professional. With bursting cleavage and a sexy pout, she always found a reason to touch him, like she was just waiting for him to make his move. A month ago, he'd been considering what life might be like with Sarah. She seemed like a safe enough choice. Looks and business and success all rolled into one. Except the spark wasn't there. Not that he necessarily needed it. Probably. But now that Jules and Noelle were in his life, he didn't want to consider Sarah as anything more than the business acquaintance she was. And Sarah didn't know it, but her flirtations were only making the knot in his stomach worse. Over Sarah's shoulder, Mitch could see part of the entrance to the bar, which looked out over the western edge of the lobby. He kept glancing there, though he didn't know why. Maybe planning his escape route at the earliest possible juncture. The bartender arrived with their shots, and Sarah lifted hers, urging him to do the same. Tequila. Ugh. Didn't matter how expensive it was. Who did shots of tequila past the age of 21? Evidently, Sarah did. Come on, here's to more successful ventures, including ones we haven't officially started yet. Her grin glinted mischievously as she reached over and caressed the side of his face. He clinked his shot glass against hers, forcing a smile and resisting the urge to swat her hand away, even as he tilted his head to put some distance between them. As he tossed it back, he swore he caught a glimpse of Jules out of the corner of his eye. But that was impossible. She was upstairs with the baby. Once he'd downed the amber liquid, he searched the bar again. Just to be sure. No Jules. He was imagining things, probably because he was feeling guilty and eager to get back up there and help her. He should have canceled this meeting. Insisted on having it during regular hours in his office. This felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. Mitch needed to steer it back to business and wrap it up quickly. "Did you have a chance to look over the latest projections for the new properties?" he asked her, pushing his now empty glass to the side. "No, I thought we could discuss them." She gestured to the bartender for another round, but Mitch shook his head before he could refill his glass. Frowning, he pressed his hands down on the bar. "Since you don't appear to be ready to talk numbers, perhaps we should reschedule for another time when we can meet in one of our offices." "Mitch, you need to lighten up," Sarah brushed up against him. "Some of my girlfriends and I wanted to go grab dinner before we go to a new club later." "What do you say? You should come. We can keep talking business." The air quotes she made around "talking business" made his stomach pitch to his feet and warning bells sound in his head. He didn't even want to imagine Jules's disappointment in that choice. Nor did he want to entertain even the thought of an evening like that. He needed to wrap things up here and now, before Jules declared him a lost cause and totally useless foster dad. "I need to get back upstairs," Mitch said. "Would you like some company?" She trailed her fingers down his arm as she practically purred. Taking her hand, he placed it back on the bar. "Sarah, I thought you came to talk business." "Oh, come on, Mitch. You know the investment is in the bag. If I'd had any questions, I would have called you during office hours." She went to touch him again, but stopped when she saw the look on his face. She frowned briefly before her expression morphed into something more sexual. "We've been dancing around this attraction to each other for years. Don't you think we should act on it? I know it would make our fathers happy." A sigh escaped him. Mitch fished his phone out of his pocket, intent on calling for a car to take Sarah wherever she wanted to go, so long as it was away from him. As he swiped the screen on, he realized he'd missed 4 calls and several texts. He stopped breathing for a moment, fearful he'd missed something urgent, since his phone had been on Do Not Disturb. Jules had sent 3 texts. "Hey, are you busy? I really need you to come up here. Are you getting any of my texts or calls?" And then, "Never mind, I don't need your help." "Excuse me," Mitch said, sliding off his stool. "I need to return this call real quick." He stepped toward the front of the bar as he called Jules, counting the seconds until she picked up. It clicked over to voicemail, but a text from her arrived almost simultaneously. "Going to bed. Everything's fine." That was a relief, at least, but he still needed to get out of here. His phone pinged again and he checked the message, surprised to see it was from his dad. "I know you're meeting with Sarah Osterman. Don't disappoint me, son. We need their investment if we're going to break ground on the Colorado properties in spring." Blowing out a breath on a huff, he returned to his post at the bar, where Sarah waited for an answer. "So what do you say?" Her eyebrow arched. "At least have dinner with me, and we can tell our fathers that we actually talked business, and we can close this deal." His father's demands cycled through him as he looked down at her hopeful eyes. She'd said it herself. This was the route to closing this deal. A lot was riding on Osterman Investments, funding the new project that his father had managed to snatch out from under Colin Forrest, including his potential next role as the head of Denton Hotels. "I'll go to dinner," Mitch finally conceded, stuffing his hands into his pockets. Going to dinner didn't equate to going to a club. He could still seal the deal and get home at a decent hour. And wasn't that the definition of the work-life balance? Still, he couldn't shake the gnawing sensation as he accompanied Sarah out of the bar. Something was off. He just couldn't tell what.
Chapter 18. Jules. Jules stood staring down at Noelle, finally sleeping peacefully in her crib, for what felt like an hour. Even though she'd buried the alarm under 5 pillows in Mitch's bedroom and shut the door, an appropriate present for him to come home to, she could still hear the shrill ring in her memory, but maybe she should be grateful for it. Because that annoying little device had jostled her out of this crazy reverie in which she and Mitch were heading for something big and back down to reality. Jules heaved a sigh, finally turning from Noelle and heading for the living room. Even though she had plenty of work to do and plenty of sleep to catch up on, she would be doing neither of those things. No, right now she needed to call her mom. The phone was ringing before she even sank into the couch. Her mom picked up on the 3rd ring. "Honey," she exclaimed. The familiar rasp of her voice made Jules smile. However difficult her childhood had been with her hypercritical mother, she was the only mom she had. And sometimes Jules needed her. "Hi, Mom." She sighed, wondering where to begin. "You got a minute?" "Of course I do." "I was just sitting down to watch Grey's Anatomy." Usually they'd watch that together whenever Jules visited. It was something they started when Jules was in college, and it gave them something to bond over. Jules didn't have many memories of her father, who'd decided he wasn't father material while she was still in diapers. She had a vague memory of a fun day at the zoo followed by ice cream, but that could have been any one of the many boyfriends her mother had latched onto over the years. And since Jules had her mother's surname instead of his, she couldn't even be sure of his last name. Over the years, she'd contemplated doing one of those DNA tests to see if she could track down her father or someone from that side of the family, but she knew it would hurt her mom, who would think that she wasn't good enough. Still, having more family, to spend time with, to share major events with, to know that she wasn't alone, often pressed at her thoughts when she was feeling down. While her mother wouldn't admit it, she felt the same. Except she sought those connections via a revolving door of rich boyfriends, intent on living the ultra-rich, ultra-luxe lifestyle. Surprisingly, none of that wealth had ever transferred over into her daily life or Jules's upbringing. In fact, now that her mother had finally given up on the rich boyfriend life goals, her life was plainer than ever. "I've sort of found myself in a situation," Jules began. "Something that might come as a bit of a shock." She took a deep breath and spilled the executive summary of the story. The more she spoke, the more absurd everything sounded. Playing house with a billionaire while they watched over a child that wasn't even theirs? Who was she kidding? After her hurried summary of the situation, her mother tutted. "Julesy," she started, disappointment already straining her voice. "I thought I told you those rich men are never good news." I know. You're only gonna get hurt." "You already are hurt," she added. "I have no idea what I'm doing. I've just been going along with what I feel is best, but—" Jules' gaze drifted to the couch. But the truth was, Mitch was a free agent, and so was she. They'd not talked about taking things beyond Christmas, and once Noel left, would they have anything to unite them? Finding him in the bar, being caressed by that gorgeous woman while they raised shot glasses, told her everything she needed to know. She just hadn't expected it to hurt so much. A lightning bolt of feeling crushed, followed by a disappointment that made her limbs heavy. Still, an hour later. And the worst part was that Jules wasn't sure who she was more disappointed in. Him, for stringing her along in this fantasy, or herself, for believing it in the first place. "I just thought we sort of had something going," Jules went on. "We have a connection." "You thought?" her mom interjected. "He's a great guy," Jules said. "Uh-huh," sure, Jules sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. This was what she needed. Perspective. A hard kick to the backside to remind her that she was being foolish. And there was no one better than Mom for that. "You know my own track record with those wealthy types," her mom said. And through the phone, Jules could hear the flick, flick, flick of the lighter. Her mom didn't smoke much anymore, unless she was stressed. And clearly, this conversation was as stressful for her as it was for Jules. They're all the same. He might seem nice, but do you know how easy it is to seem nice when you've got billions tucked away? This guy can buy anything or anyone. He can create any reality he wants by throwing money around to the right people. And at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is what he wants. Don't forget that. Jules ground her teeth. Her mom was right. It was easy to forget everything she'd always warned her against while bathing in luxury itself. But now she needed to figure out her next steps. Because she couldn't stay here. She'd see the gala project through to the end so she could get paid. Afterward, she needed to get back to her own apartment. Her own life. The money she was getting paid for the gala would allow her to have some downtime before she had to find another job. Or who knows? Maybe she'd start her own event planning business. With all the people attending the gala, surely she could network her way into gaining some new clients. "You're right, Mom." Jules sighed, picking at the stitching on the leather couch. It might hurt to walk away, but it would hurt even worse to get sucked into an illusion and lose years of her life, in love with someone who couldn't return the feeling.
Chapter 19. Mitch. Mitch paced the foyer of the penthouse in his formal suit, checking and rechecking his watch, even though he knew what time it was. They were on time. Actually, they were early. But still, anxiety had him wound tight. This was the big night. The gala, complete with the Christmas display, the events, and the announcement. Jules was still getting ready, which meant Mitch had ample time to fester in his own thoughts. Jules had been distant ever since he'd left her upstairs with Noel to have dinner with Sarah. Thankfully, the woman had realized that he was not interested in her romantically, and they'd managed to get through dinner before she took him up on his offer of a car to drop her at the club. And before he'd made it back into the hotel, he'd gotten a message indicating that she'd signed the electronic documents and the investment plans were approved, which made Mitchell Sr. deliriously happy. Except for the fact that Mitch had zero personal interest in Sarah. Mitch had tried to engage Jules in conversation about anything but the gala plans, but she would stubbornly steer it back. He gave up and apologized to her repeatedly for leaving her in the lurch like that, but she never snapped out of it. He figured it was stress with the upcoming event. After all, she'd been working on it for the past week. The reason for the season, in both of their worlds, and they were about to see the results of all her hard work. But he couldn't deny that Jules' lack of her warmth disturbed him in a major way, mostly because he felt like he was missing something that he needed, which meant that he needed Jules. At least Noelle had recovered from her cold, which allayed some of the household stress. Jules finally breezed down the hallway, dressed to kill in a long, shimmery black evening gown with teardrop pearls in her ears. Her hair was swept back in a fancy updo, prepared by a stylist Mitch had brought to the penthouse exclusively for her hair and makeup. "Wow," Mitch said, his heart thumping in his chest. He couldn't pry his gaze off her if he wanted to. She glanced at him through the mirror as she inspected her lipstick. "What? You look stunning." She pursed her lips into a little smile. "Thanks. You don't look so bad yourself." Jules headed for the door, but he caught her by the waist. She stiffened at his touch, yet another new development of the past couple of days. "The dress looks better than I could even imagine," Mitch murmured, bringing her closer. She avoided his gaze. "But I'm really curious to see how good it's going to look on the floor." Jules snorted. "Come on, we need to go one kiss." He brushed his lips over the shell of her ear, and she melted a little against him. "I can't," she protested weakly. But she tipped her head back to look at him finally, and confusion shone in her gaze. "Why?" She swallowed, searching his face. "Because it'll mess up my lipstick." He heaved a sigh. "Fine. Later then, when we can mess it up all we want." She didn't reply, just continued her walk toward the door. Mitch followed her, a frightening cocktail of emotions boiling inside him. Things were fine with Jules, or were they? Tonight would be amazing, or a dismal failure. He'd either be named the new CEO of Denton Hotels, or be presented with some dismal, embarrassing award for service. There was so much build-up toward tonight that he could hardly put one foot in front of the other. "Everything is going to be fine," Jules said once they were in the elevator heading downstairs. "I know. You're white as a ghost and grinding your teeth." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Yeah. Okay. So I'm a little nervous. Same here. But one of us has to keep it together," she mused, crossing her arms. "I guess it'll be me." He cracked a grin, fake knocking her chin. "That's why we work so well together." She stared at him for a moment, the smile slowly fading from her face. Finally, she jerked her gaze away from him as the elevator hit the lobby, which only confirmed Mitch's suspicions. Jules was unhappy about something, but he couldn't figure out what. Except now was not the time, not with the doors sliding open and the immense sweep of the lobby greeting them, filled with people dressed to the nines. Before they even stepped out, a few people called his name, waving at him. Whatever was bothering her would have to keep bothering her until after the gala. As soon as they stepped out of the elevator, everything else melted away. The anxiety, the stress, the horrible sense of not knowing and wondering. He was in business mode, which meant he compartmentalized all the negative emotions until later. Everyone who was anyone was here. Everyone in the Denton Empire and their families, which was normal, but this year they'd opened up the guest list to include the media and industry bigwigs. Mitchell Sr. had wanted to go big, so Mitch gave him what he asked for. "Wow," he breathed, squeezing Jules' hand. "This looks better than I could have imagined." All her hard work was obvious, from the neatly arranged Christmas displays to the trendy Santa posing for pictures with his white man bun and aviator sunglasses. Surprise and excitement shone in the eyes of the guests. A banner hung above the Santa display, encouraging attendees to use the hashtag #MerryDentmas hashtag. When he glanced over at Jules, she was watching everything with bright eyes and a small smile on her face. "You should be proud," he whispered to her, wrapping his arm around her waist. "I am," she said, looking up at him. For a moment, whatever barrier she directed between them had dissolved. He dug his fingertips into the softness of her waist, suddenly desperate for a kiss. "I want to ruin your lipstick right now," he confessed. "Mitch." Her response was interrupted by the booming voice of his father, strolling toward them with his hands outstretched. "Son." His laughter almost hurt the ears if you stood too close, because his father, as a veteran hotelier, knew exactly how to turn on the charm and gregariousness for public events. He pulled Mitch into a quick hug. "Look at this place. I told you to go big, and you did, of course, Dad." He laughed, clapping his father on the shoulder. "We owe it all to this lady." He stepped back, gesturing toward Jules. "Jules, meet my father, Mitchell Denton, Sr. He's clearly impressed with your work. Impressed." I'm bowled over. He surged forward to offer his hand, which Jules shook firmly. "Mitch, you found the best event planner on the planet. Now let's go mingle. I saw Sarah Osterman over there. I was happy to hear you secured the deal." His father stopped when he realized Mitch wasn't following him. Panic streaked through Mitch's limbs. He felt torn between two worlds, the sweet, tender world that he'd been creating with Jules, and now the harsh reality of being his father's son. It was easy to forget it, up there in the penthouse, their lofty dream world, safe from judgment or prying eyes or his father's narrow-eyed inquisition. "Mitch." "Hang on, Dad." He turned to Jules, looking for some sort of answer there. His mouth parted, but no words came out. "What's the matter?" Jules asked. It felt like cement had filled his throat. He couldn't find words, much less force them out. "Mitch, let's go," his dad barked, looking at his watch. "I'm here with Jules," Mitch finally said, turning toward his dad. That was simple. That was enough. Even though saying the words made him feel like he might puke a little. His father's brows formed a dark line. "What do you mean?" "She's my date." Mitch forced a bright smile, slipping his hand over the small of Jules's back. His father blinked. "The event planner." It wasn't a statement as much as a veiled question. Only Mitch could hear the "Are you serious?" buried beneath his words. Yes. Mitch hadn't planned on outing them like this, much less immediately. But for some reason, it felt necessary. "It's been a dream to work with your son," Jules spoke up, her voice light and sonorous. Her smile strained at the edges. "And your flagship hotel is just marvelous. I've never held an event in such an elegant space before." Mitchell Sr. nodded slowly, still looking Jules up and down. "And if it helps, I'm not just an event planner," Jules went on, her words becoming rushed. "Did you meet my son at Boston University?" his father asked. "No, actually, I went to Barnard." "And what did you study?" his father asked. "Business, with a minor in fashion design." His father gave a humorless laugh and nodded, looking around. Mitch knew the sign well. He was done with this conversation. "Anyway, spending the holidays with Mitch and Noelle has been a blessing," Jules went on. Mitchell Sr. blinked dully at her, his hands propped on his hips. "Sorry?" "Noelle." Jules cast Mitch an uncertain glance. Didn't Mitch tell you about… Jules, that's enough for now, Mitch said in a low voice. So you two are together? His father asked, swinging his finger between the two of them. Mitch's eyes fluttered shut. He didn't want to be dealing with this right now. He hadn't even had the conversation with Jules yet. He didn't know how to respond to that, because what if he said yes, and she begged to differ? Dad, don't worry about it, Mitch said. You don't need to worry about a thing. Worry? Shouldn't I worry when the reputation of my business is at stake? His throat clamped. This was getting tense. Jules took a few steps back, looking between Mitch and his dad. I'm going to powder my nose, she said, her tone clipped, and then spun on her heels. Mitch watched her go, paralyzed with indecision. You can't be serious, his father said. He spoke through clenched teeth. An event planner, and for a moment, Mitch wasn't sure of anything. What was going on between him and Jules, much less what his father might expect of him. But one thing was certain. He couldn't let Jules walk away from him after that exchange without at least trying to make things right. He ran after her as fast as he could.
Chapter 20. Jules. Jules didn't know where she was going. She couldn't see a thing through the veil of tears blurring her vision, but it didn't matter. She needed to get away from that man and his horrible father. If you weren't sure before, now you know for certain. The words ran through her head like a marquee, confirming all her doubts, canceling all her dreams. Mitch had seen her as a plaything, not someone to be with, not a partner. Just a pretty girl to tag along, someone to disown when his father came sniffing around. She hated how much it hurt. She thought she'd started the painful dislodging process after discovering him at his business meeting with that beautiful woman, but apparently she still had some dislodging to do. This was what she got for playing house with a gorgeous man who could get literally anything he wanted in the world. Hurt, broken-hearted, cast aside. Footsteps sounded behind her. Jules! Wait. Mitch's voice echoed down the hall. Relief sizzled through her, but she tried to ignore it. She shouldn't be happy he was chasing after her. She needed to end things with him. Jules! Where are you going? His voice was closer now. She swiped at her cheek where a few tears had fallen. Away, she said, her throat tight. Will you stop? He shouted, his voice coming out sharper than she'd ever heard. She stopped walking, waiting for him to catch up. When he did, he gripped her arms, searching out her gaze. Don't leave, he said. I wasn't ready to have that conversation with my dad, I'll admit. But please? Mitch, let's not fool ourselves, she said, her voice wavering as she spoke. She looked anywhere but at him. They were alone in this long, forgotten hallway, but the sounds of the party reached them faintly. Violins and conversation and the occasional champagne bottle being uncorked. About what? He asked. About this. What we've been doing. She sniffed, wiping her cheek again. And when I say this, I'm talking to myself. Because I was the one who fell for you, okay? I was the one who went all in, not realizing that you wouldn't reciprocate. That's my fault. But what's between us is nothing. It can't be anything. You're you and I'm me. We need to have this conversation, Mitch said in a low voice. But let's wait until after the… No! It's happening now, whether or not it's convenient. Her chest hitched with a restrained sob. And if you don't want to, then I should keep moving along. I knew better than to hook up with a guy like you. I'm smarter than this smarter? Mitch cocked a brow. What's so wrong with a guy like me? You seem like a nice guy, but you're really not. You won't stick up for me in front of your dad. You act like I'm nobody to you. Heck, you'll even go out for drinks with a woman and tell me it's a business meeting. I'm not stupid. Mitch's confusion etched itself across his face. What? Drinks with a… Yeah, the other night, when I needed you. I came downstairs looking for you and saw exactly what your meeting entailed. bunch of BS. Whatever. I can see what a relationship with you would be like anyway." The words were tumbling out of her now, fiercer and faster than ever. She couldn't stop the avalanche. "So why would I want to get in deeper?" Mitch's jaw flexed. "Jules, that was a business meeting. That's Sarah, one of our investors. She—" He paused, a sigh escaping him. "She's a flirt, and it's no secret that she would like things to become more personal." But nothing happened. Since it was a business meeting, I went along with the investors' wishes, which included having a couple shots and grabbing dinner. But nothing happened between us and never will because I'm not interested in her. I'm interested in you, because I want to be with you. Maybe you do, but only in private. Only when you can keep it a dirty little secret." She was sneering now, another wave of emotion welling up inside her, and the only way she could keep from crying was if she held on to her anger. Mitch worked his jaw back and forth, staring at the floor. He reached for his phone a moment later and swiped it on. "I'll be there in a second." He hissed into the phone and then swiped it off. "Is that your charming father calling?" Jules asked. "Yes, he's getting ready to make the announcement." He dragged his gaze up to meet hers, and his eyes were stormier than she'd ever seen. "Is there anything I can say right now that will help this?" Jules scoffed. You had nothing to say in there. Why would out here be any different? Mitch's phone buzzed again and he swore, swiping it to silent. "I'm going to take Noelle to my apartment tonight," Jules said, her throat tightening again. This was it. The moment when she freed herself from continuing her mother's history of poor decisions. "You don't have to concern yourself with us any longer. Go do your thing." She steeled herself to walk by him, but he grabbed her arm in a vice grip. "Do not walk away from me like that." "What?" she spat. "You can't—" His phone rang again and he swore loudly. He swiped it on. "I said hang on," he hissed into the phone. To Jules, he said, "Wait for me upstairs. I have to go now. You hear me?" "Wait for me. Please, Jules, don't leave like this." He sent her an intense look as he backed up down the hallway. She watched him as he turned and jogged away, her chest heaving like she'd run a marathon. Wait for him. Fat chance of that. She scurried back through the lobby, darting between people and keeping her head down as she rushed toward the penthouse elevator. She didn't dare look up, lest she see Mitch or his father anywhere. Cheers erupted from somewhere in the gala, and then the booming voice of Mitch's father sounded over a microphone. She shuddered, hurrying into the elevator. Her mind swirled with hurt and confusion the whole way up. When she got to the penthouse, she dismissed the nanny and got to packing, tears streaming down her cheeks the entire time. She needed to hurry because Mitch would be back, and who knew what would happen then. She had to get out of here. Had to get back on her own turf so she could think for a second. She needed a cool head and time to get her emotions under control. Jules packed as much as she could into her bags before calling for a driver. She instructed him to meet her at the front door in 10 minutes, which meant the only remaining step was taking Noelle from the crib. She hesitated, not wanting to wake the baby, but finally she scooped her into her arms. Noelle fussed a little, but Jules was able to rock her back to sleep. She struggled to pull the rolling luggage behind her, but she managed to get herself and Noelle onto the elevator without waking the baby or tripping over her ball gown. Jules stared back at the penthouse as the doors slid shut. Goodbye, Mitch. A tear rolled down her cheek. This was the right thing to do. So why did it feel so much like the wrong decision?
Clapping filled the ballroom, and hundreds of happy faces shone back at him. Mitch waved and smiled for what felt like the 100th time since his father's big announcement. It had happened. He was Denton Hotel's newest CEO. But his smile strained at the edges, and his stomach sank lower with each passing second that Jules was out of reach. He couldn't bolt from the stage quite yet. But soon. Mitchell Sr. slung his arm around his shoulders, turning toward another set of cameras. "This is a dream come true," Mitch said into the microphone once the applause had died down slightly. He had already given a short speech, and the Christmas gala still had plenty on the agenda. But Mitch only had one thing on his new, edited agenda: hunt down Jules. A jazz quartet sprang to life, signaling the end of the announcement. His heart raced, and he turned to his father. "Thanks, Dad. I have to step away now? Just when the party's getting started." Mitch's brother Josh jogged up to the stage area, his fiancée Amelia in tow, followed by their cousin Chris. They must have arrived during the announcement. Josh came up the small staircase and wrapped his brother in a hug. "Good to see you, bro. I'm proud of you." "Same here, Mitch," Chris said, reaching out to shake his hand. Mitch grinned, but it faded fast. He clapped his brother on the back and waved at Amelia. "Thanks. I'm on my way out right now. How long will you be here?" "You're leaving?" Josh asked. "Dude, we just got here," Chris said. "I have something I need to take care of." Every passing second reminded him that he needed to make things right immediately. It already felt too late. "I'll be back. I want to catch up. You three look great." He was heading down the stairs now, pointing at his brother and Amelia as he tried to combine pleasantries with getting out of there. "We need to get lunch soon, and I want to hear about the renovations upstate. Bye, guys." His father stepped into his path, grabbing his shoulder. "What is this about?" "That event planner. Come on, you need to enjoy yourself. This is your night." "Yeah, a night that wouldn't have happened without her." His father scoffed. "Event planners are a dime a dozen. You are the real star tonight. You've been working your whole life for this." "Yeah, and what do I do that's so special? Believe me, I love my job. I love our business. But I'm sick of pretending I've got something special up my sleeve that nobody else has. Jules is the best woman I've ever met. She's selfless and dedicated, and the first partner I've ever had. And you'd have me throw that away because she's an event planner." His father's nostrils flared. "So you'd throw all this away? Your future with the company? For her?" Mitch froze as he stared his father down. Looked like tonight was the night for uncomfortable conversations. "What do you mean, exactly?" Mitchell Sr. huffed out a breath, crossing his arms. "I would think that would be obvious. You either want to be the head of Denton Hotels or you don't." At least his father had the good sense to have this conversation at his normal volume, but that didn't stop the cold fury from rolling through Mitch. "For the record, Father, I'm happier than I've ever been, and it's all thanks to her. I refuse to lose her, so that's it? You'd walk away from everything for a woman who has come to mean more to me than Denton Hotels?" "Yes, absolutely." The words flowed more freely, now that he'd had a chance to grapple with the idea of losing her. "Jules is the first person I feel like I can really share my life with, and I've fallen in love with her. If you can't accept that, then I decline the position, and I submit my resignation, effective immediately." "What? You can't do that." His father's voice rose. "You need to think carefully about what you're saying, son. This isn't something you can come back from. I mean it. While heading up Denton Hotels has been a dream for me, it pales compared to having Jules in my life." "Excuse me." Mitch didn't wait for his father's reply and raced up to the penthouse. He didn't expect her to be there, but he had to be sure. The place was empty. Noel's empty crib stung the worst, and his chest tightened as he fished out his phone to call for his driver. He wasn't getting a response, so he found a backup. He was in the car within 5 minutes and pulling up to Jules' building within 15. His heart hammered between his ears as his gaze washed over the brick building. His breath came out in white puffs as he hurried toward the front doors and buzzed her apartment number. After a few moments, there was no response. So he buzzed again. Still nothing. He swore, pulling out his cell phone and calling. It rang before switching to voicemail. Was it possible she wasn't even here? Fear coiled inside him. She had to be here. Had to. Because he wasn't going to let today end without his little, unlikely family being reunited. One thing was certain: Noelle and Jules were unofficial Dentons. Mitch walked back to the sidewalk, peering up at the building. He made a rough calculation of which apartment was hers based on his last visit. He tried to remember the hallway, how many steps he'd taken, whether the door was on the right or the left. Based on all that, he concluded her apartment had to be one of the darkened windows, and there was a fire escape leading right to that window. He turned over the idea a few times in his head. If anyone saw him climbing the ladder, they'd probably call the cops, but it was a risk he was willing to take. He'd gladly spend the night in jail if it meant Jules would give him a second chance. Taking a deep breath, he reached for the dumpster against the wall and pulled it closer to the fire escape. Grabbing the handle on the lid, he hopped onto the dumpster and jumped up to grab the bottom rung on the ladder and pull it down. Climbing up, he made his way to Jules' apartment and sent up a silent prayer that it was the right one, because there was no way he was going to let his family spend a night without him. Ever.
Chapter 21. Jules. Jewel lay in bed, tossing and turning. She'd turned her phone off to avoid having to speak to anyone and regretted it now, as she had no way to check the time without turning it back on. As bad as it was for her, it was even worse for Noelle. The baby didn't seem to like her apartment at all. She'd fussed nonstop for a full hour after they arrived, which didn't even make sense because how could she really tell she was in a different place? But the baby knew somehow that this wasn't her home, which made Jules feel even worse. She'd not only woken her up out of a peaceful sleep, but she'd also forcibly removed her from her only safe haven at this point in her very young life. The self-criticisms and anxieties were spiraling now that she was back in her own place. She'd thought that they would have lessened once she was back in familiar surroundings. After all, wasn't that the point, to come back to her own world? To find a clear head and her own 2 feet? But now that she was here, she couldn't stop thinking about Mitch. She couldn't do this alone, and more than that, she didn't want to do this alone. She missed his steady presence beside her, the heat of him lying beside her in bed, his warm smiles and quiet reassurances. She'd made a huge mistake. She should never have walked away without letting him talk to her, but she'd been so hurt. She knew he'd spoken semi-regularly with his father, and she couldn't understand why he'd never spoken to him about her or Noelle. Were they some dirty secret not to be shared with his family? Was he embarrassed by them? By her? Her mother's warnings had flashed in her head, and Jules had known she had to get away from the gala or risk having her dignity completely shredded. A soft tapping at her living room window made her jolt. She sat up, trying to orient herself in the darkness. It had been so long since she'd spent the night in her own apartment, much less on the couch next to a bassinet. Maybe these were the normal night sounds that she'd forgotten about. A shadow moved outside her window, and her heart leapt into her throat. Or maybe someone was outside her window on the fire escape, seconds away from breaking in. Her limbs turned to stone, and she waited in deathly silence for any other sound. After a few moments, the tapping returned, and this time, it was definite. She fumbled for her phone, turning it on. What was taking so long? Updates? Now? Taking a deep breath, she blew it out hard. Calm down, Jules. It's probably just a drunk at the wrong window. It didn't necessarily have to be someone looking to rob her or worse. She wanted to go investigate, but with Noelle in here? She debated for a moment and then decided she wasn't going to get any sleep without knowing who or what was out there. She forced herself to walk over to the living room window and pulled back the curtain. A gasp rocketed out of her. It wasn't a robber or a drunk person. It was Mitch. He cupped his hands around his eyes, pressing his face to the glass. Jules. His voice came out muffled against the glass and left a foggy, warm spot. Will you let me in? Please? It's freezing out here, and I'd really like to avoid getting arrested. She could only blink in amazement, moving to open the window before she could even think. She lifted the lower sash as high as it would go, and Mitch folded himself inside the apartment. She hurried to shut the window once he was in. What are you doing here? She hissed. You didn't answer my calls. Or respond to the buzzer. He rubbed his arms and she realized that he'd come here straight from the gala. He looked around, his gaze landing on the crib. Is she asleep? Yes, but just recently, so keep your voice down. Mitch raked a hand through his hair, his intense gaze switching to her. Jules, come back to the penthouse. Her chest tightened and she gripped the arm of the couch behind her. Why? We lead different lives, and I don't think there's room for me in yours. Mitch stepped closer, searching out her gaze. There's plenty of room for you in my life. In fact, without you in my life, there's a whole emotion clogged her throat, and she looked away. I was thinking about what the rest of my life might look like, now that my dad named me CEO. Her brows shot up. Congratulations. Thanks. It's everything I wanted. At least, everything I thought I wanted. But then I turned it down. Jules gasped. You turned it down? But this is everything you wanted. Why would you do that? It's everything I thought I wanted, but I was wrong. He sighed, gesturing toward Noelle in the bassinet. Actually, everything I want is here. In this apartment. I don't want to envision a future without you and Noelle in it. She kept shaking her head. I don't understand why you would do that. I thought you wanted to be CEO? I did, but not if it means I'd lose you. Jewel ears were buzzing with white noise, and all she could manage was a weak, what? I told my dad that I was in love with you, and if he couldn't accept it, then I resign. Reaching up, Jules pinched her arm. She had to be dreaming. Ouch. She wasn't dreaming. She was awake, which meant... So, not only did you give up your dream job, you quit? For me? Mitch's whisper faltered. You are the only woman I want to be with, Jules. Jules covered her face with her hands, and Mitch swooped forward, wrapping his arms around her. She cried into his chest, clinging to him as pulled her into a tight hug. It felt so right, so undeniably right, to be in his arms. Will you take a chance on me? He murmured into her ear. I promise that I will make sure you come first for as long as I live. She squeezed her arms tighter around him, feeling the decision reverberate through her. She nodded, unable to speak or potentially ever leave his embrace. Because there was one place she wanted to be, and it was right there, in his arms, bathed in his scent. Right alongside him on this crazy journey they'd started together. When she finally found her voice, she tipped her head back to look at him, tears shining in her eyes. I needed you to be a jerk, she said quietly, because that's what my mom taught me all rich men are. Mitch snorted, but you're not. A jerk wouldn't climb a fire escape at midnight to profess his love. A jerk wouldn't choose his new family over his dream job. A jerk wouldn't... Oh no. The gala. I don't want to be there if you're not at my side, he whispered, and then pressed his lips against hers for a kiss. Happiness and certainty swirled through her, making her dizzy. But Mitch grounded her. His embrace and his solid heat kept her from floating off into space. Because that's what partners were for. They were the compliments you didn't know you were even looking for. Just look at us, Mitch murmured. We started as perfect strangers, and now we're a perfect family. She dissolved into laughter, more tears escaping, because it was true. It was so, so true, and she wouldn't have it any other way. Before either of them could say anything else, Mitch's phone began to vibrate. A lot. I think someone is trying to reach you. Noelle began to stir, so Jules grabbed his hand and led him to the bedroom as he pulled his phone out. She watched as a smile spread across his face. Good news? Text from my father. He was smiling, so clearly it was something positive. She smiled back at him. Well? What does it say? Instead of answering, he turned the phone around so she could read it. You have balls, Mitch. I'll give you that. And I don't accept your resignation. The job is yours. So get the girl and get your butt back here in time for brunch tomorrow with the family. Oh, wow. Are you going to take the job again? Mitch took his phone back and pocketed it. Only if you're okay with it, because there's no way I will do the job without you by my side. So what do you say? Jules threw her arms around his neck and hugged him. Yes, of course I will. I'm so excited for you. Wait, does this mean we have to go back to the gala? He frowned, shaking his head. Definitely not. If you're willing, we'll stay here tonight and head over there tomorrow morning. All of us. Together, Jules liked the sound of that. All of us. Together. Epilogue. 6 months later. Jules. Jules! Come here. Mitch's voice boomed through the penthouse. She looked up from where she'd been playing with Noelle on the carpet of the living room. Their little squirmy 8-month-old was more inquisitive and exploratory than ever, which meant Jules couldn't turn her back on her for a second. She scooped her up and followed the sound of his voice. Her brows shot up as she stepped onto the expansive balcony. A dinner table had been set up out here, complete with a high chair for Noelle. The table was set for 2, with a covered dish in the center. What's all this? Jules asked. Just my Secret Service elevator missions while you were occupied in the living room, Mitch said, a knowing grin on his lips. He took Noelle from her arms to get her settled into the high chair, and Jules looked out over the city. Her breath caught as it often did, beholding the incredible sight. She'd never tire of this city or this view, or this family. That's my little love nugget, Mitch cooed as he strapped Noelle into the seat. Daddy cooked something very special for you. He did? Jules asked, easing into her chair. She'd been entirely unaware of this happening, but she blamed that partially on being a little tired from Noelle's recent nighttime teething pain, and just generally getting lost in playing with the child-sized xylophone their daughter loved. Oh yes, but he did it secretly in the kitchen downstairs, so as to not alert the family. He pressed a kiss to the top of Noelle's head and then turned his attention to the table. Behold. He uncovered the plate in the middle of the table, revealing an array of cooked vegetables, asparagus, potatoes, purple carrots, and more, alongside an incredibly juicy-looking steak. This looks amazing, Jules said, gaze darting between the food and Mitch's apron. Though I'm not sure what looks better. The food, or you in that apron, I'd understand if you choose the food. After all, I'm still wearing clothes. Jules snickered, unfolding her napkin. Mitch settled into his seat, reaching over to Noelle to tweak her button nose. The baby giggled, slapping her hands against the high chair table. I got some news today, Jules said once they'd both filled their plates with food. I'm getting a promotion at work. Mitch paused, his eyes going wide. That's amazing, honey. You've only been there for a few months. Jules grinned as she cut up her steak into very tiny pieces for Noelle to try. It is. But I turned it down. His brow furrowed. You did? I did. I've decided I want to start my own business. A grin crept across his face. Do you now? Yep. Learned some good business tricks from this guy I know. Plus there's that whopping bonus I got for that Christmas event. So decided it might be time to take a stab at the old entrepreneur thing. I'm proud of you, Jules. Either way, you have my full support, I know. She transferred the tiny bits of steak to Noelle's tray, grinning over at Mitch. And I love you for that. I have some news for you, Mitch said as he chewed. He leaned back in his chair, looking over at Noelle. The evening sun had just sunk low enough so that the entire balcony was bathed in red-tinted light. I spoke with Donovan and Jenna, and Noelle's biological mother has agreed to terminate all parental rights. We just need the judge to sign off on the adoption, and Noelle will officially be ours. Jules' heart leapt into her throat. The police had no luck trying to track down Noelle's biological family, and a social worker had arrived at the hotel prepared to take Noelle from them, but they'd been ready. Thanks to Mitch's connections and money, they were able to cut through the typical red tape and gain temporary custody of Noelle. Then he'd hired a private investigator who scoured the security camera and surrounding CCTV footage from that fateful December day. He'd been able to find the young woman who'd left Noelle in the manger, allowing them to begin a formal adoption process. That's amazing, Jules said, but her voice betrayed the worry she felt down to her bones. But, Mitch prompted. After so little time as a couple, he knew her so well it seemed like they'd been together for 50 years. But, she sighed, shaking her head, what if the judge decides that we're not fit to adopt her? Honey, we are the fittest people to adopt this little bundle of energy. Right, but you never know what could go wrong. She wouldn't rest until the entire process was over with. The constant waiting was driving her nuts. I don't trust bureaucracy. Mitch nodded, his jaw flexing as he studied something in his lap. I know what you mean. And I've been thinking. He fiddled with something in his lap and then looked up at her, his icy blue eyes filled with mischief and something more. I know what will seal the deal. Oh yeah? Yeah. Mitch stood and came around the table. When he towered over her, smiling mysteriously, Jules knew that her racing heart was a sign. She just wasn't sure of what. I don't understand what's going on. Mitch dropped to one knee, fishing something out of his pocket. He presented her with a ring, a diamond engagement ring. Now do you? He asked, his smile spreading ear to ear. Jules gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Are you serious right now? Jules Cardwell. Event planner extraordinaire, top-notch mother, the only lover I ever want in my bed, the perfect partner I never knew I needed. He paused, wetting his bottom lip. Will you be my wife? A laugh sob racked her body. Holding back the tears was hopeless. A few trickled down her cheeks as she nodded. Yes, of course. Why wouldn't I? Mitch laughed, pulling her into a hug. She clung to him, her tears dampening the shoulder of his shirt, knowing down to her bones that this was the only man for her. This was the only family for her. In the background, little Noelle clapped her hands and gurgled happily. Their perfect family was about to get a little bit better, and she couldn't wait. The end.